an outcome of this privilege. So the GDP of southern countries is not low because they produce little value. It is because their labor, their lands, and their lives are cheapened. This happens through structural adjustment, but that's not the only mechanism for cheapening. It also happens through the exercise of monopsony power in global commodity chains. Lead firms like Apple are so dominant in their sectors that they can basically dictate prices to their suppliers in the global south, forcing them to keep wages at or even below subsistence. It also happens through monopoly power. More than 90% of all patents are owned by northern firms. So not only do they set prices for their suppliers, they can also set the prices of final sale. And of course, the difference between the prices they pay for their suppliers versus the prices they get at the till is registered as GDP in the global north. This allows lead firms to appropriate value that is produced in the global south, a pattern that is cemented by the patent rules enshrined in the World Trade Organization. Speaking of which, I should mention here briefly, finally, that the WTO is also fundamentally anti-democratic. Bargaining power in the WTO is determined by market size. So the countries that became rich during the colonial period are able to determine the rules of trade in their own interests. So in this sense, in the WTO, inequality begets inequality. So with the data on imperialist appropriation in mind, we can return to the question of global inequality. When neoclassical economists think about global inequality, they assume that all the world's countries are on the same general trajectory of development. They're just at different stages. The poorer countries of the global south are simply behind. They will be able to follow the same development trajectory as the US and Europe and eventually catch up to them. But once we understand that capitalist growth in the global north depends on patterns of imperialist appropriation, this narrative is revealed to be absurd. Catch-up development cannot occur within a system that is predicated on imperialist appropriation. It physically cannot occur in the context of net south-north flows, and it cannot occur within a system that relies on cheapening southern labor and resources. Saying that poor countries can catch up to rich ones in this context makes about as much sense as saying that Amazon workers can catch up with Jeff Bezos if they just work hard enough. These are not two different trajectories. They are two poles of a distribution within a single economic system. The income gap between the South and the North has continued to widen since the end of colonialism. There's no catch-up development happening. This is not because poor countries are behind. It is because they are exploited. This also allows us to have a different perspective on global poverty. Poverty in the global South, contrary to dominant narratives, is not some kind of natural condition. It is an effect of imperialist appropriation of southern resources and labor and productive capacity. It is an effect of price depression, which constrains southern income and purchasing power and consumption. And it is an effect of the rules of international trade and finance that preclude the South from using sensible policies that would enable them to achieve sovereign development, such as the policies used during the 60s. And indeed, this is why we see that development success stories are only really ever achieved to the extent that countries somehow manage to claw back some degree of economic sovereignty and use state-led industrial policy, which of course we can see in the case of China, some of the South American countries, and for different geopolitical reasons, the East Asian tigers. Okay. But there's another reason to question catch-up narratives, and it has to do with ecology. Here's the key point. The high levels of resource use and energy use that characterize the core economies cannot be universalized. They cannot be universalized because they rely on net appropriation, but also because they are wildly in excess of sustainable boundaries. If all countries were to use resources at the rate of the core economies, we would need 4 Earths to sustain us. If all countries were to use energy at the rate of the core economies, decarbonization in line with the Paris Agreement would be literally impossible. Indeed, we would be cruising for a future of guaranteed catastrophic climate breakdown. On the contrary, what is required if we are to have any chance of reversing ecological breakdown and achieving the Paris Agreement goals is that the core economies need to actively and quite dramatically scale down their use of resources and energy. As research in ecological economics has demonstrated, the core economies will need to adopt degrowth policies, focusing production around human needs and well-being, rather than around corporate expansion and elite accumulation, in order to reduce resource use while at the same time improving social outcomes. This has been defined in the literature as an eco-socialist transition. I'm not going to go into the specifics of this, of degrowth here, what kinds of policies it might require, how to achieve it, and so on. That's not my focus this time. Rather, I want to take a minute to emphasize the demand for degrowth is not just about ecology, rather it is rooted in anti-colonial principles. Okay. Degrowth scholarship calls for an end to the colonial patterns of appropriation that underpin Northern growth in order to release the South from the grip of extractivism and a future of catastrophic climate breakdown. Southern countries should be free to organize their resources and labor around meeting human needs rather than around servicing Northern growth. Degrowth is, in other words, a demand for decolonization. It's important to recognize that degrowth scholarship builds on the legacy of anti-colonial thinkers like Fanon, Gandhi, Julius Nyerere, Thomas Sankara, Berta Cáceres, people who knew that capitalism in the global north was driving colonization in the south. And this thinking is reflected very clearly today in the People's Agreement of Cochabamba and other similar documents. This one was signed in 2010 by thousands of social movements from across the global south, calling for the governments of rich countries to cease their appropriation of the planet's commons and scale down their resource use. Social movements in the global south recognize that ecological breakdown is being driven ultimately by capitalism. They recognize that it has clear imperial dimensions, and they call for an anti-colonial struggle in response. And it's incumbent on all of us to begin to stand in solidarity with these demands. So what should convergence look like in the 21st century if catch-up development is not possible? Here's the good news. We know empirically that it is feasible to meet the needs of the entire global population, 10 billion people, at a good standard within planetary boundaries, but it requires a radical change in the world economy. The objective should be as follows. Resource use and energy use in the global north needs to decline dramatically to get back within sustainable levels and to be compatible with achieving the Paris climate objectives, while resources in the south must be reclaimed for meeting human needs, with production increased where necessary to do so. So convergence should be focused on what is required for human well-being and ecology. That's it. This is a very different vision of convergence from the dominance narrative of catch-up development. So what is this going to require? Well, it's going to require that the global north transitions out of capitalism and shifts toward a democratic, post-capitalist economy. This is crucial in order to obliterate the constant structural pressure for imperialist appropriation, but it is also crucial in order to make it feasible for the North to meet the needs of its own citizens with significantly less resources and energy use than it presently uses. And neither of these objectives are possible in a capitalist economy, okay, for the reasons I've described earlier. At the same time, we need several urgent structural changes to the world economy. We need to democratize the institutions of global economic governance so that Southern governments have an equal voice in decisions about trade and finance. We need to cancel odious or unpayable debts or introduce mechanisms for safe and legitimate default to liberate Southern governments to direct their resources toward human development objectives and to free them from remote control power by foreign creditors. We need to end structural adjustment programs and allow Southern governments to deploy the policies that we know to be necessary and successful when it comes to sovereign development, tariffs, subsidies, capital controls, nationalization, public spending, all of the policies that are presently prevented from being adopted. Social movements in the global south have been calling for all of these reforms for decades, and for too long their demands have fallen on deaf ears. But here's the problem. Capitalists in the global north will not voluntarily make such a transition. Of course, we might hope that enlightened leaders will take steps in this direction, or that radical social movements will eventually force them to do so. And indeed, we should do everything possible to support movements toward that end. But why should the global south wait around for this to happen? Why should they wait around to be decolonized? There's an additional option. Southern governments can and should take steps to achieve unilateral decolonization, delinking from exploitation by Northern capital, by mobilizing their resources and labor to meet domestic human needs rather than to service the interests of Northern growth. This is not easy to achieve, but insights from modern monetary theory offer pathways for how it can be done, at least in the case of nations that have sovereign control over their own currency. The first step is to reduce dependence on Northern imports. And here I'm relying on several economists from the Global South who have been advancing these ideas, such as Fadel Kaboub and Ndongo Sambasia. The biggest import categories are food and energy. Governments can issue the national currency to fund a strategy of food sovereignty, mobilizing land through regenerative ecology, agroecology, to provide nutritious food for all, while at the same time pursuing a strategy of energy sovereignty by rolling out renewables. This would significantly reduce governments' need for foreign currency and thus reduce the reliance on Northern capital, which is what puts countries in a position where they are forced to accept structural adjustment conditions. To mobilize labor for these projects, governments can issue currency to fund a public job guarantee. This would end unemployment and ensure that everyone has access to a decent livelihood, therefore achieving a major development objective that has so far remained out of reach. So instead of mobilizing labor around sweatshops for Northern consumption, mobilize labor around what is required for decent living in the Global South. The third step is to build sovereign industrial capacity, using tariffs and subsidies where necessary, in order to organize production around meeting domestic needs as much as possible, to further reduce the pressure for imports, and to participate in regional trade, which tends to be much less exploitative. Now, to the extent that any of these policies are prohibited by foreign creditors or under structural adjustment regimes, which is quite often the case, governments can and should take steps to default on external debts through collective action wherever possible. This might make borrowing in foreign currency more difficult for a time, but because we are reducing our dependence on foreign currency, this doesn't matter as much as it otherwise might. Now, I want to emphasize that this also requires a transition out of capitalism in the Global South too. The reason that capitalism has failed to deliver development in the periphery is because capital has to cheapen inputs. In the periphery, capital does not generally have the option of externalizing exploitation, unlike the core does. So capitalist states and firms have no choice but to try to compress wages domestically with violence where necessary. And this is why capitalist states in the South are quite often repressive of their own citizens and repressive of radical social movements, because they do not have the privilege of using an imperial arrangements to stabilize accumulation. So if the objective in the South is to increase wages and improve social conditions, it is easier to achieve these goals in a democratic post-capitalist economy where, again, production can be geared towards social goods. We know from Amartya Sen's work that when Southern countries adopt socialist development policies, especially universal public provisioning systems, they are able to achieve big improvements in social outcomes, even with modest levels of GDP. Now, of course, this approach faces serious headwinds. Let's not kid ourselves. Many governments in the Global South are thoroughly captured by capitalist interests, and the radical quorum that we had in the 1960s and 1970s has been all but destroyed. So the anti-colonial movement must be rebuilt. And this is happening right now through grassroots social movements across the Global South and in several states and international initiatives, but it is still nascent. The job of progressives in the Global North and of those who care about international developments should be to align with and support these struggles and make every effort to defend them when they come under attack. So let me summarize by saying this. The vision of a just ecological future is possible to achieve. It is physically possible to achieve. But this is not possible within the structure of the existing world economic system. The sooner we face up to this fact, the better. It's going to require revolutionary change, revolutionary transformations, coming from social movements in the periphery, but also in the core, in order to bring this vision into reality. Thank you very much.
So thanks a lot, Jason, for this very illuminating talk. I'm very fascinated by your ability to draw kind of the whole picture and take us through both history and current developments. There are so many things to talk about and to ask you about. And I can also see that there are many questions from our student participants out there. I think since we now have only 10 minutes left, I think I will leave my long list of questions and try to pick out a couple of the questions that have been sent to us by our student participants, because I can see that they have been following your talk very closely. First, I want to pick a question from Dorothy. There has been a slow shift in terms of using GDP as a measurement. So we started out with GDP, right? And this is interesting. For example, the Human Development Index or the Happiness Index. What do you think about the use of these measures in order to promote development?
Yes, no, I mean, there's no question that the HDI is a big improvement on simply using GDP as a measure of progress. Of course, the HDI also includes GDP as a major factor. And so you have to always be aware of that. I think that it makes actually much more sense for us to disaggregate and consider more directly what kinds of goals we want to achieve, right? Think about the specific social objectives we want to achieve, be it better wages or better employment or better housing or better healthcare, and target those directly. And think about the ecological objectives we want to achieve in the global north, for example, be it regenerating soils or reducing resource use and emissions, and target those directly, rather than assuming that targeting GDP growth is somehow magically going to solve our social and ecological problems, which of course it never does. So I think we have to just be a bit smarter about how we think about our objectives in the economy.
Yeah, thank you. There is a question which I also actually thought about when I was preparing for this event, and which I wanted to ask you, and maybe I can combine my question with the question of Ashish Saksa. The question of Saksa is, can indigenous peoples' movement structurally challenge capitalism and pave the way for a new world order? I think you also indicated that this could, this is something that is happening already in the last moment of your talk. I was also thinking about this when in your book The Divide you have a chapter called from I was thinking about this. We had last week Achille Mbembe, who was visiting Bergen in connection with him being awarded an honorary doctorate here. And in his lecture on the universal right to breathe, he spoke about the archives of knowledge based on former ways of living, and also ancestors as a reserve of breath in a way. And in your Degold book, The Less is More book, you also talk about lessons from the ancestors and things to be learned, for example, from non-capitalist or pre-capitalist societies, and relating to this, of course, indigenous people's ways of living in different parts of the world today. So could you say something about that? I mean, the potential of indigenous people movements, indigenous people's knowledge for, a different pathway.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point. So the People's Agreement of Cochabamba was actually led by indigenous movements, although it also includes social movements that do not define as indigenous. And it's worth reading, actually, because it becomes clear. I mean, if you read this text, it becomes clear that it's much more advanced in its analysis of our global problems than anything that passes for analysis in sort of mainstream climates or political discourse in the global north. I think paying attention to their analysis is really important. Platforming their demands, aligning with their demands, et cetera, is crucial. But what becomes clear in their texts is not just their call for a different kind of economy, but also their call for a different kind of ontology, one that fundamentally refuses the human nature hierarchies and dualisms that underpin much of Western philosophy and Western economic thought, which sees nature as a kind of external, external zone where costs can be externalized and so on, right? So they call for a kind of non-dualist or post-dualist kind of ontology. I think that's quite important for our analysis as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and the question is then, can it happen? Can changes in this direction actually happen? It seems a bit. Looking around, at least in Norway, I think it's a bit depressing. The way that things are moving.
Yeah, look,
I'm sorry, I'm now taking over the question session from the students here, but I was just thinking about, COVID. During COVID, there was some sense of that, we have a standstill, we are immobile. Can we do some kind of increased sensitivity to, the world's problems? But now I have a strong feeling that we are back to usual business. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, it's quite clear that we are, and the reason that we are not able to make any changes during this crisis is simply because the social movements to achieve that have not been built. There's been a real failure to build the kind of movements that were capable, for example, of the anti-colonial struggle, or capable of the civil rights movement, or capable of the labor movements in the 1940s, or the feminist movements, the movement for women's suffrage, et cetera, et cetera. This is the scale of the movements that need to be built in order to achieve the kind of transition that we know is required for us to transition to a just and ecological economy. And those movements don't exist in sufficient form right now. They really must be built, and that's not an easy thing to do. It requires work. So simply having awareness, a kind of analysis, is not adequate. Our hope for change and the possibility of change can only ever be as strong and robust as our actual physical struggles. And so we have to build that struggle if we want to have any hope for the future. I think that's the key lesson here.
Out on the streets. Yeah, actually, to follow up on what you said about feminist struggles, there's a question here from Time Yan. How do the feminist and post-structuralist perspectives reflect the globalization paradigm, or maybe how can they contribute to solve some of the challenges? The last is my addition. But,
it's interesting. Ecological economics owes an enormous debt to feminist thought. Actually, this is really important. It was feminist thinkers who first.
I guess you have to add yourself.
What every woman knows, which is that.
All right, let's pause this. Let's bring it back down. Toss it all around. Welcome to another episode of Subversive History. I'm your host Johnny, dialectically. With me as always.
I think you might need to mute. Do you have Discord muted?
Yeah, no, I gotta mute that. All right, whatever. Let's try this again. Fucking God damn it. All right, yeah. Welcome to Subversive History. I'm Johnny dialectically. This is an anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist Twitch stream. We are nearing the end of The Divide by Jason Hickel, not Jackson Hickel, not the mega communism guy. This dude's from Swaziland, South Africa, and today we're going to be covering chapter 7, which is called, what is it? Like Plunder in the 21st century? Yeah. Basically, right, just like everything else that we've learned throughout our reading this book, is that it's good, Dakadoon. Thank you for joining us again.
What is that about? What is that?
That's Rob Rousseau. That's like godfather of the show. Fucking Robert Rousseau. So hopefully we're gonna have him on soon. We're gonna be like adding a day soon, chatters. It's gonna be great. We're gonna be chatting it up about like our favorite beverages and shit for up to like 4 hours.
I don't know if I wanted to devolve into that much nonsense.
No, it's just gonna be like your favorite beverage. Is it gonna be Diet Coke or is it gonna be Diet Dr. Pepper?
See, for me, Diet Coke is great, but Diet Dr. Pepper is such a treat. You don't find it as much, that when you find it, it's like it's very exciting. When like the corner store doesn't have Diet Dr. Pepper that often, so when you uncover one, it's special.
It's a rare treat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let me just edit this real quick. Done. All right. So,
how you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's a really like shitty fucking day outside. It was fucking freezing in my apartment because like it's on some shit where like the heat doesn't actually kick on till it gets like cold enough, right? Like the heat doesn't turn on until it's like below like 40 something degrees, but it was like 50, you know, so it was freezing. No.
What the fuck?
Once it kicks on, we can control how hot it gets, but other than that, nah.
So you're saying like you're saying like the owner like there's there's a threshold where they won't even let you put it on?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not until it gets below like 40 something degrees that like it turns on, but it didn't get that low. It just stayed at like 50, so it was like freezing from like, you know, at that night and stuff. I don't know, dude.
That's brutal.
I hate it here.
Yeah. That's brutal. Yeah. So getting back to our topic here, we are in our second to last installment of The Divide, a brief guide to global inequality and its solutions. If there's anyone here that hasn't been along with us for the ride, the Divide ride, we have gone pretty much chapter by chapter and tried to just extract some of the key points out of this absolutely voluminous text of economic data, anthropological data regarding the historical causes of poverty. If poverty is something that is a natural state of human beings or underdeveloped countries, or if this is something that's man-made and man-maintained. If you have been here, you know very, very, very clearly at this point that it is in fact man-made and man-maintained, and that the nefarious, pernicious, insidious institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF, and the World Trade Organization have a direct or indirect hand, or I would say the overt cause.
I don't even think that it's at all indirect. It's just direct.
Cause in the perpetuation of this poverty, and it is these are Western institutions with Western appointed leaders, and they kowtow to Western economic interests. This does not come as a surprise to many individuals, but it's important to know the actual specifics of it, so that you can actually validate this understanding of like the third world is not poor because they are simply inefficient, because they are simply defunct, because they don't have the same degree as civilization or mental capacity or any of these other things that you hear apologists for Eurocentrism or white nationalism, or I guess white internationalism. Would you recall that? You know what I mean? Those who uphold the Eurocentric world order, the common things that you'll hear from them. By reading this book, you will glean a very substantial understanding of all of these topics and have certain data points to back up, to refute them.
I'm trying to, like, now that you've mentioned white internationalism, I'm just like trying to think, like, is that even like a thing? I feel like it's on like such a sliding scale, because whiteness is like one of those things where it's only defined by what it's not. You know what I mean?
Correct. But also, I mean, the way that I put that as is, you know, obviously we have a phenomenon of white nationalism that is individuals trying to maintain some degree of racial homogeneity in their respective nations. But I think on a broader scale than that, there is, even most of the people that you walk by in a day-to-day sense, I believe, including myself in many ways that I can't escape, in many ways that I probably could do better with. In many ways, we hold up a system of international white supremacy that essentially subjugates the global South to be the, you know, economic workhorses of the Western world. And there's many people that probably walk around and being like, oh, I don't do anything to contribute to white supremacy or anything like that, probably because they see in their day-to-day lives that like they don't harbor individual racist views against individuals. But I mean, in terms of like the same way that people talk about the police force being a systemically racist organization, and while that might not be an indictment of the specific individuals that take part in it, it's more of a criticism of the overarching structure and the inequities that it perpetuates. This exists probably on a far more serious scale, just in terms of unequal exchange as it exists between the global north and the global south.
Right.
So that's what I was referring to when I said internationalism.
I was going in like a completely different direction. I was just like, once again, Europe, right, is a fucking like peninsula of Asia, and it's a completely made-up fucking concept that makes no fucking sense, because you can't tell me that somebody from like Calabria fucking Italy and some dude from fucking Norway are like, yeah, we're both European. Like,
yeah, I don't know.
Can't tell me that like an Albanian, right, and like somebody from Ireland are like, yeah, we're both Euros.
Would you say the same thing about somebody from Korea and someone from India, and both being Asians?
Right?
I'm asking, would you say that?
I would say that, like, you know,
you have a problem with the whole continental classification system.
I do have a problem with the whole. Why? Because, like, if I'm not mistaken, it's made up by white people.
Maybe. I don't know.
All right, that's the only way that something as nonsensical as the way we divide continents could make sense. Is if it was made, you know, by somebody that didn't know fucking anything about any of these places.
Yeah, the only one that like really makes sense is like Africa, because it's like one significant landmass that's like, here it is. I guess South America also, and North America. You just get things.
Australia.
Australia, sure, we'll take that one. But we're getting way off into like the half-baked weeds here.
Yeah, we're getting into the weeds here.
If you've been with us, you've seen kind of the chapters that we've gone through, and the most recent chapter, 2 chapters ago, we really got into like the nitty-gritty of like in like the waning years of the Cold War and the 90s, the ways in which the IMF and the World Bank truly perpetuate these systems of poverty and economic subjugation for the third world, and that their economic policy prescriptions are disastrous, are misguided at best and disastrous at worst. And now we are getting into this chapter, which is called Plunder in the 21st Century. I think this is an extremely prescient topic to discuss, because I feel like a lot of apologists for American exceptionalism and American atrocity, for lack of a better word, like to look at the Cold War and the things the United States did during the Cold War are inexcusable. And anyone with a like room temperature understanding of history has to admit that. So these apologists and these, you know, American exceptionalists, they draw a clean line. They're like, hey, Cold War, times are crazy. We did fucked up shit, but this is a new age of American democracy, and we are no longer so brutish with our international or foreign policy relations, international relations. So I do believe that it is important to be able to highlight the ways in which there are still these methods of destabilization, and there's still these methods of debt peonage, modern day debt peonage that exert subjugation upon the third world.
Yeah, like it's kind of like when you're in history class and they tell you that, like, oh, between World War I and World War II, America was not interventionist and, you know, was a period of peace, right? Or that, like, you know, the 90s were a period of peace after the Soviet Union fell and we didn't do anything. But it's just like, literally, you don't have to go very far beyond the surface to see that, like, you know, no, we were having interventions, like interventions, right? As if like the people being shot and murdered and, like, you know, cleansed and, like, you know, massacred by US backed like Contras and shit know the difference between like an intervention and a war, right? Like, it doesn't take much to see that, like, no, this was not like a period of peace at all, right? And he opens up like this chapter with the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, right? Actually, there's a couple of them before that. There's
So let's get right into that real quick. I don't want to, because I actually have some links for all this stuff. I don't want to gloss over any of them because I actually want to look into each of these a little bit. I have something pulled up for each of these just so that I can really validate the things that we're saying here. So, as you remember, maybe 3 chapters ago, it was called the coup culture or the century of the coup or something like that, where it really went down like, you know, the ways in which that the United States and its European cronies, or what's it called when like a criminal has like running mates or whatever,
like lackeys.
Yes, lackeys. It's the gang. You know what I mean?
A Koopa.
Prevent protectionist, collectivist, nationalistic, socialistic, and progressive developments throughout the third world. You can read Killing Hope by William Blum if you want a very concise, itemized list of these interventions. Most of them are pretty well known. I haven't read that one yet. I would very much like to. You keep teasing me with it. So in that century of the coup, now we're in the burgeoning 21st century. So it's important to understand that this model of coup and opposition support and economic destabilization projects are still very much in play. So we have a couple examples here. First thing, coups, for example, still remain a live tactic into the 21st century. This is quoting Jason Hickel at this point, especially in Latin America. In 2002, the United States tacitly supported a coup attempted against the democratically elected government of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Just to bring that up real quick. I'm actually going to bring this whole thing up. 2002 Venezuelan coup d'etat attempt, failed coup on April 11th, 2002, saw President of Venezuela Hugo Chavez ousted from office for 47 hours before being restored to power. Chavez aided in his return to power by popular support and mobilization against the coup by loyal ranks in the military.
This is the one where I believe it's called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." I think it was like an Irish documentary, like film crew that was present for like the entire process of the coup going on, and even into Hugo Chavez's return to office too, because it only lasted like less than a week or something like that, right?
Yeah, and then we have this here, less than a week. It was 47 hours. You know,
right. 47 hours.
This kind of like idea that it's like, oh, the Venezuelan people are so tormented and repressed, and they hate the despotic dictator which presides over them, that even when he is removed from power, completely out of power by the military, he's reinstated in less than 2 days with popular because of popular support. Venezuela, like, I won't say that everything is great in Venezuela or that every decision made there has been sound, or that there hasn't been any issues, but also you need to understand that most of the grievances that you hear from Venezuela come from a more educated, more wealthy, English-speaking minority that resides in Caracas that feeds media narratives to media outlets such as the Miami Herald, and the voices of the more rural laborers are very scantily included in these. You can read Dr. Alan McLeod's book, Bad News from Venezuela. He does a really, really great, I think it's his doctoral thesis regarding media bias in Venezuela. I think they actually make a I think they actually make a claim about that right here. Yeah, here it is. The private media was accused of biased reporting in support of the opposition protests and coup, with coverage being described as lopsided as well as suppressed and manipulated. Allegations that owners of the media organization actually participated in the coup have not been proven. So, according to Wikipedia, it hasn't been proven. I'll say that maybe it hasn't been proven, proof positive. But if you read the book, Bad News from Venezuela, Dr. Alan McLeod puts together a staggering amount of evidence of this exact dynamic playing out. So, but then also I wanted to substantiate it a little bit more. Here's just something from The Guardian. Venezuela coup linked to Bush team. Failed coup in Venezuela was closely tied to senior officials in the U.S. government. The Observer has established they have long histories in the dirty war of the 1980s and links to the death squads working in Central America. Obviously, long thing here. I just wanted to kind of bring up something to substantiate that specific line just a little bit. If you want to check that out, definitely Google this article. So now just to go back into this, and in 2004 helped topple Haiti's progressive president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. This one's interesting because you actually have WikiLeaks of Hillary Clinton's. Oh, no, this isn't the Hillary Clinton one. Coup d'etat in Haiti following several weeks of conflict resulted in removal of President Jean-Bertrand Aristide from office. In February 2004, a rebel group called the National Revolutionary Front of Liberation and Reconstruction of Haiti took control of Haiti's fourth largest city. By February, the rebels had captured the second largest city and were besieging the capital, Port-au-Prince, at the end of February. I think you can go right down here. French and U.S. involvement. In 2022, French Ambassador Burkard told New York Times that France and the United States had effectively orchestrated a coup against Aristide by pressuring him to step down and taking him into exile. So now you even have French ambassadors in this very year admitting to the Western orchestration of this coup. Just this very year. I don't know at what point this happened this year, but
well, I guess it's been 20 years, so they're like, no one cares anymore.
Yeah, and I think maybe it throws them off the scent of things that they're actually doing. You know what I mean? If you admit to kind of in the United States, they're like, listen, Iran-Contra, that was terrible, but I swear Afghanistan, you know what I mean? We'll admit to that. I'll own the rap on that. But this one, why would I admit to that if I'm doing bad things now?
Yeah, it's kind of like the what the fuck is it? That pipeline, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that recently got for some strange reason somehow somebody must have blew it up underwater, and it was just leaking natural gas into whatever fucking Baltic Ocean or sea that is, right? And there's been the U.S. said they were going to investigate it, and we still have no idea who's responsible for it officially. Right. I'm sure in 20 years, it'll be well, yeah, we blew it up. We didn't want Europe to renegotiate any kind of deal with Russia.
Yeah. And I guess this is actually echoed by a U.S. Congresswoman, along with the family friend, reported that he had been forced to resign and abducted from the country by the United States. I guess he was on, I guess there was an interview on Democracy Now! Too, if you want to look more into that. But yeah, just a little bit of evidence there for that. Then in 2009, the elected leader of Honduras, Manuel Zelaya, was deposed in a military coup that was countenanced by the U.S. State Department. I'm actually not familiar with this word here.
What does that mean?
What? This is the interesting one that actually has WikiLeaks documents from Hillary Clinton.
No, admit as acceptable or possible.
Did you look it up? Wait, read it back to me one more time.
Admit as acceptable or possible.
Okay. So the 2009 Honduran coup d'etat was part of a 2009 Honduran constitutional crisis, occurred when the Honduran army on 28 June 2009 followed orders from the Honduran Supreme Court to oust President Manuel Zelaya and send him into exile. He had attempted to schedule a non-binding poll on holding a referendum on convening a constituent assembly to rewrite the Constitution. Zelaya refused to comply with the court orders to cease, and the Honduran Supreme Court issued a secret warrant for his arrest. 2 days later, Honduran soldiers stormed the president's house in the middle of the night and detained him, forestalling the poll, which would have reflected the will of the people. Instead of bringing him to trial, the army put him on a military aeroplane, and flew him to Costa Rica. Later that day, after reading a resignation letter of disputed authenticity, the Honduran Congress voted to remove Zelaya from office and appointed Speaker of Congress Roberto Micheletti. His constitutional successor. It It was the first coup to occur in the country since 1978. So there's human rights abuses of the interim government. But then there's these WikiLeaks documents. On 28 2010, the organization WikiLeaks began releasing 251,287 confidential documents, which detail the correspondence between the U.S. State Department and U.S. embassies around the world. Among these is a cable written by U.S. Ambassador Hugo Lorenz in late July 2009, which analyzes the legality of the removal of Zelaya under the Honduran Constitution. Lorenz concluded that although Zelaya might have committed illegalities and even violated the Constitution, there is no doubt that the military, Supreme Court, and National Congress conspired on June 28 in what constituted an illegal and unconstitutional coup against the executive branch. U.S. Congressional Research Service, a nonpartisan congressional committee, however, found that the interpretation of the application that led to be legal. Okay. Emails released later. What?
It's funny that they need to say that it's nonpartisan because it's like,
yeah,
wouldn't it technically be partisan? Like,
yeah.
You know, no matter what, especially if it's whatever.
Emails released later show that the 2009 removal was supported by Hillary Clinton's State Department by not recognizing a coup in order to maintain U.S. aid to Honduran people. Clinton and her team worked behind the scenes to stall military and economic efforts by neighboring countries through the Organization of American States to restore Manuel Zelaya to office. The OS meeting today turned into a non-event, just as we had hoped, wrote one senior State Department official, celebrating their success in diffusing what they had judged would have been a violent or destabilizing restoration. Secretary Clinton had also helped organize elections where she, Latin American leaders, and diplomats, in her own words, strategized on a plan to restore order in Honduras and to ensure that free and fair elections could be held quickly and legitimately, which would render the question of Zelaya moot.
She is not a good person.
There have also been more overt interventions. The U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 was largely about securing access to oil and defense contracts, as well as preventing Iraq from selling oil in euros instead of dollars. I didn't pull anything up for that because I think we're all pretty aware of like the implications of the Iraq war.
Just listen to Blowback, season 1.
You can listen to Blowback, and it'll do a much better job than what I have to say. As for the NATO airstrikes on Libya in 2011, diplomatic cables released through WikiLeaks reveal that it had to do in part with France's concerns about Libya's attempts to create a Pan-African currency as an alternative to French-controlled CFA franc.
Weird that nothing about like, oh, he's doing this or that to this group of people or any of that other shit that is always brought up.
WikiLeaks, France and UK's government behind Libya breakup. A WikiLeaks email from 2012 reveals that France and the UK colluded to break up Libya and loot its natural resources for profit. A letter from Clinton's top advisor, Sidney Blumenthal, to Hillary in early March 2012 reveals that former French President Nicolas Sarkozy and British Prime Minister David Cameron both used their intelligence services to instigate a coup in Libya. Less than a year earlier, the Western neo-colonialists, including the U.S., started looting the race for Libya's resources on behalf of their companies. During the period between January 2012 and March 2012, officers of the French General Directive of External Security and the British Secret Intelligence Services activated long-standing contacts with tribal and civic leaders in eastern Libya in an effort to encourage them to establish a semi-autonomous zone in the historic province of Cyrenaica. I'm sorry,
I can't.
According to extremely knowledgeable sources, this effort was initiated by advisors to French President Nicolas Sarkozy after complaints from concerned French business leaders that the new Libyan government was not rewarding appropriately French firms for the leading role France played in supporting the 2011 revolution against former dictator Muammar al-Gaddafi.
Whoa, wait, what was that part right after that was coming up?
Oh, ISIS joined in this effort. Oh my God. At the instruction of the office of Prime Minister David Cameron. This highly confidential effort comes in response to the inability of National Transitional Council government in Tripoli to organize the country effectively and deal with Western business interests in an effective and efficient manner. The French and British business and intelligence officials believe that semi-autonomous regime in the eastern city of Benghazi will be able to organize business opportunities in that region. This in turn will allow Western firms to initiate new business projects. The same officials believe that there is also a reduced threat from Islamist militias in the east. According to a knowledgeable source, French officials believe that this situation is the result of al-Qaib's failure to organize the country to disarm the ethnic and regional militias who did the majority of the fighting. One thing I don't like about this, though, is I don't like the knowledgeable sources stuff. Like that's the same thing that I would say. Yeah, I like if Radio Free Asia had that, I would say that I don't trust it. So and I also tried to pull this up. It seems like the WikiLeaks site doesn't really work anymore. I don't know if you've tried to pull this stuff up.
I haven't. It was funny because what's that?
I tried pulling up multiple WikiLeaks direct sources here, and this is what I got every time.
Yeah, you're gonna have to go through like a Wayback Machine or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of server issues and whatnot for the old WikiLeaks site.
Did you hear about Lula wanting Julian Assange released?
No, but that's dope. Is he going to grant him asylum in Brazil?
I hope.
Well, good luck getting him out. I mean, they have him now, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, he's pretty much been like tortured into like, just his brain's like Swiss cheese right now, apparently.
Yeah. So, and then lastly, assassinations are still in the playbook too. Honduran indigenous activist Berta Cáceres was assassinated in 2016 by U.S. trained forces to end her resistance to a dam across the Rio Guadalquivir. Here she is, which in no way ambiguous terms, she was a Honduran environmental activist, indigenous leader, and co-founder and coordinator of the Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. She won the Goldman Environmental Prize for a grassroots campaign that successfully pressured the world's largest dam builder to pull out of the Agua Zarca Dam. She was assassinated in her home by armed intruders after years of threats against her life. A former soldier with the U.S.-trained Special Forces units of the Honduran military asserted that Cáceres' name was on their hit list months before her assassination. As of February 2017, 3 of the 8 arrested people were linked to the U.S.-trained elite military troops. 2 had been trained at Fort Benning, Georgia, USA, the former School of the Americas, renamed WINSEC, linked to thousands of murders and human rights violations in Latin America by its graduates. In November 2017, a team of international legal experts released a report finding willful negligence by financial institutions. For example, the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, the Netherlands Development Finance Institution, and the Fin Fund pursued a strategy with shareholders, executives, managers, and employees of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, private security companies working for DESA, public officials, and state security agencies to control, neutralize, and eliminate any opposition.
I guess she would have been considered that opposition, right?
That was needed to be eliminated. Also, right. Just that reference to the School of Americas. If you want to kind of like read a history of the School of Americas and the terrorist death squads that they have trained, funded, and fueled with intelligence right here in the United States, and then sent them back to carry out murderous tasks against leftists and indigenous people and other types of political dissidents all throughout Latin America. You can read this book. It's titled School of Americas, Military Training and Political Violence in the Americas. It's by Leslie Gill. Very good book.
So this is like kind of why when people say like, oh, is it like that sounds so conspiracy brain for like, like a domestic version of like Operation Gladio or like a domestic version of like the School of the Americas to me, because it's just like, why not? Like we've done it literally everywhere else, and it's not as if like people aren't treated as if like by American police like they're not an occupying force.
I don't know if you realize this, but I didn't even scroll down to the details of this woman's Wikipedia page. It is blatant in the first paragraph of her summarization that she was murdered by U.S. trained forces in Honduras because of her opposition and protest against a major dam that was going to be built under the supervision and direction of all these international financial institutions, very much like the ones that we've been criticizing this entire stream. And there was quote unquote willful negligence on the part of all these Western institutions that were overseeing this dam being constructed, and in the ways that they were requesting the elimination of opposition.
So they're gonna request it, and then the negligence happens, or like
That's what I'm
how
saying.
does that
It's just all
work,
of
bro?
I don't know if you heard what I read too, but individuals were arrested for this, and they were part of these. It wasn't even speculative that these were U.S. trained individuals that carried out this murder. It is a fact. It's on the record at this point. So, yeah, and that was in 2016.
Yeah.
You know, you could even say like, 2002 in Venezuela, 2004 in Haiti, and then even 2011 in Libya. Bro, we're living in 2022, man. TikTok didn't even exist in 2011.
Vine was still a thing, bro.
Track of the political coups in Libya. This is in 2016 that you have an indigenous activist protesting against these, Western-backed environmental development structures, and who was murdered by U.S.-trained forces that violently carry out the will of Western economic institutions.
Right. But like, you might as well like put a tinfoil hat on if you start talking about how like, the state definitely murdered all of those like, Black Lives Matter, like, protest organizers, right? There was like all the people like Standing Rock where like, leadership was like harassed and like monitored by like, the state and shot at with rubber bullets and all this other stuff. And a bunch of people wind up being like.
And this is also, this is even a more formal, like, probably the examples of this are going to be less numerous. Hey, Sam, what's up? Examples of this are going to be less numerous than the more ambiguous way that this is carried out. When I was living in Guatemala for a little bit, and I was taking part in the education center, they showed us documentaries about Canadian mining companies that are buying up land in Guatemala, and those that oppose it, indigenous miners and people that don't want to sell their land to these mining companies, are mysteriously being murdered. And unfortunately, we don't have the same breadcrumb trail that this Honduran situation has provided us. But you just have these ways where it's like they just ended up dead. And unfortunately, in Latin American countries and Central American countries, they can just kind of chalk these murders up to like, well, these are violent countries. Who knows how these people die?
Yeah.
So. And obviously, if you talk to an educated leftist perspective from an individual in Guatemala, they will tell you that, yes, these are being motivated and financed or just otherwise orchestrated by these Canadian mining companies and their interests there in Guatemala.
Right. Hey, Sam, sorry that, like, I don't know if it was something on our end or
it
not.
May have been.
It may have been.
We're running without a producer today, so you have the monkeys.
No idea what we're doing. We're flying by the seat of our pants here, whatever the hell that means.
Right. So that's the end of that first little introduction paragraph, and that's really not what this chapter is about. That was just like a mere introduction, just to provide a little bit of foundation that the things that we covered over the preceding century are still at play. These are still happening.
Dude, wait, before we move on, dude. All right, so there's that one part where he says, as a result of external debt payments shot up from 6.1% of government revenue in 2013 to 10.8% in 2016. Guess what the fucking current level of percent of debt is?
What is
from countries in the global south? Bro, it's 17.4%. It's almost 20%.
Yeah. So, what year was this book written?
I think it was 2018 or something. It's like I kind of wish that he had a like an updated version or something, or like a.
He has another book about degrowth and how like degrowth will save the world or something. Like that.
Yeah, I pulled up the article in the chat about the debt pandemic is engulfing the global south. They got really bad under COVID.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, if you notice, there's a theme in this book, and there's a theme throughout history, and it's that there is these periods of crisis that come almost predictably, time and time again. The debt pandemic is engulfing the global south. This is 2021, so this is 3 years after the book was written, or at least when the book was published. It may have many components of this might have been written beforehand, because there's no mention of Donald Trump in this book, and I feel like if the meat of this book was written in May 2017. Thank you, Sam. So I just have a feeling that most of this was compiled in the pre-Trump days, because I think there would have been some mention of that. COVID-19 is not the only pandemic ravaging across the global south. The debt pandemic threatens to prevent developing countries' recovery. Without a doubt, the COVID-19 pandemic represents the most severe developmental setback in recent history. A lot of viruses still raging across the global south. It's not the only pandemic currently engulfing developing countries. In fact, the debt pandemic threatens to prevent them from achieving meaningful, let alone sustainable recovery. Between 2010 and 2020, public debt of developing countries has increased from an average of 40.2 to 62.3% of GDP. That reminds me of, do you remember the statistic I read about Lebanon, where it said that like 50% of their entire nation's GDP is going towards debt repayment, whereas like 23% goes to education and like food for children?
Yeah, and then in 2020 or 2021, they had like a massive financial crisis, especially after that port that had like, it was like their main port that had like a decade's worth of like fertilizer or something. What's that?
Yeah, it was talking about the explosion.
Yeah, the explosion, the one that like is like crazy looking, looks like a nuclear explosion goes off, right? And, like every window in the entire city is like broken. Yeah, after that happened, like you had people that like weren't even able to take out more than like $100 in a given like day or week for months, and I don't even know if it's any better now. I honestly should have looked into it before I brought that up as an example, but you know.
Well, you didn't. I brought it up. I just called back to the thing, so you had no idea that I was going to do that. Paying creditors versus funding healthcare. Here's a nice little example of exactly what I was bringing up in regards to Lebanon. These developments are particularly disturbing when compared to what developing countries spend on healthcare. While healthcare systems buckled under the strain caused by years of underinvestment, and developing countries struggled to procure the resources to access COVID-19 vaccines, they continued to pay their external creditors more than $37 billion in debt service in 2020. This figure represents 1.6 times the amount of resources allocated by the same countries to public health expenditure in the same year.
Tell us the story on the port, Monsieur Balls.
Yeah, you got a story?
Do you got the story, or like, you know, did I just like give it away with the fertilizer or some shit?
I thought it was like fireworks or something.
No, I'm like almost certain it was like fertilizer or something that like, you know, was kept in like this warehouse for like over a decade. But it was like a fucking shit ton of fertilizer. And like somebody was like fixing a door or something, or like welding something nearby it or something like that, and it like caught fire. Fucking wild. All right, here we go. Igor Kolomitsky, he plundered the Ukraine State Bank and owned the TV station that made Zelensky. He blew it up. All right, hey, you got to tell us how he blew it up. Like,
yeah, is there a source on that or something?
Yeah. Sauce, please.
So while Monsieur Balls pulls that one up, I'm going to talk about the paragraph which where that statistic came from. Third world debt is also reemerging as a major concern. Because of the collapse in commodity prices following the global financial crisis, global South countries have watched their export revenues plummet, along with their ability to repay their debts. As a result, external debt payments shot up from 6.1% of government revenue in 2013 to 10.8% in 2016. We now know that that's about twice as much now in the year 2022 because of the information that John just brought up. Structural adjustment programs are still widely used by the World Bank and the IMF to secure debt payment. Please, if you were going to watch any of our streams covering this book, please watch the one regarding structural adjustment programs used by the IMF and the World Bank. That might be the most critical part of this whole thing to understand. In the form of new poverty reduction strategy papers. And sometimes creditors take even more extreme steps. When Puerto Rico came to the brink of bankruptcy in 2016, the U.S. Congress responded by assuming executive control over domestic policy decisions through a piece of legislation known as PROMESA, which many denounced as a form of colonialism. And new free trade agreements are still being negotiated, with investor dispute tribunals intact, as in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Just to bring up this situation in Puerto Rico, I actually brought something up on this, which I thought was pretty interesting. It's just crazy to read about this extraterritorial control that like still exists in Puerto Rico, where they like exist in this like quasi statehood with none of the freedoms, but also none of the democratic benefits of being a state in the United States. Just in time for the July 4th break, Congress imposes colonialism at its worst on Puerto Rico. Power is supposed to derive from the consent of the governed, but a new law addresses debt crisis with an assault on democracy. Shortly after the okay, so this is a bunch of like really old, like going into like back like Thomas Paine and stuff like that. So I'm not gonna read through this entire thing. There's a couple points in it that I did want to bring up. Congress could have taken solution to the Puerto Rico crisis, colonialism at worst. This is Bernie Sanders calling the Republican solution to Puerto Rican debt crisis colonialism at its worst. Dark day in Puerto Rico and U.S. history. The PROMESA legislation, as drafted by Duffy, actually announces that the provisions of this act shall prevail over any general or specific provisions of territory law, state law, or regulation that is inconsistent with this act. So pretty much just a unilateral decision by the United States to just override any kind of territorial autonomy that Puerto Rico has. Among the austerity measures imagined in the legislation itself is a plan that would allow Puerto Rico to temporarily lower federal minimum wage requirements for younger workers. So just more of this general austerity stuff. This process is driven by Wall Street's demands, not by legitimate needs of Puerto Rican people to keep their schools open, hospital staff, and first responders at work protecting the people. In the rush to do something, the U.S. Congress has ignored the Puerto Rican people, stolen their democracy, and layered on pet projects to weaken wages, threaten the government, and reassert in the most dramatic way the colonial rule of the United States of Puerto Rico.
Wasn't Hillary like really big on Puerto Rico like privatizing like most of its infrastructure back in like 2014, 13, something like that?
Right.
I want to say.
Yeah. I don't know about that specifically. If you have a source for it, I would believe it for sure. What's going on in chat? What more Shock Doctrine stuff? I own a copy of Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein. I haven't read it yet. I understand the gist of it. I very much want to read it. It's a huge book, and I've been in school, and I just haven't gotten to crack it yet. But I would definitely say that this falls a lot in line with the Shock Doctrine theory of wrenching publicly funded industries into private ownership. But I think that the Naomi Klein book focuses on like the disaster capitalism portion of that, where like it capitalizes on a disaster to like implement neoliberalism, if I understand it correctly.
Well, I mean, like it's like enforced upon, it's kind of like what the earlier chapters of this book are, is that like it's coercion into the capitalist market, especially the global one. As far as like Naomi Klein is concerned, like Shock Doctrine is like her home run. That's like, her fucking just like her greatest hit, and everything after that to me has been just a miss, just dislocating both shoulders, miss, like the bat goes flying in the air and knocks her out right in the temple. Everything else has been just like garbo. But like, I
don't follow. My extent with Naomi Klein is that there's a book by Greg Grandin called The Last Colonial Massacre, and it's about indigenous Marxism in Guatemala. And in the back of it, he interviews Naomi Klein, or Naomi Klein interviews him. And it's a really great little like snippet interview that really made me want to read the book. I have it on my bookshelf, but it's big. It's like this big.
Right.
and I think it goes into the Soviet Union's shock therapy. I believe it goes through Argentina that went through a process of similar shock therapy. I don't remember the rest of the details of it, but in terms of like books that we should read on this stream, I think that's up there in
With the shock doctrine?
Shock doctrine, yeah.
Shock doctrine.
Hey Dorian, what's up? Good to see you in chat.
To be fair, Shock tries to distinguish capitalism from its more vicious forms, misguidedly, in my honest opinion. What I'm saying is that, like, I haven't read it, so like all I've ever heard of is good things about shock doctrine, but every other like fucking hot piss shit take that she's had since has been just not great. Like she's going off about how like, you know, China is like this like authoritarian like state that needs to be like overthrown because it's like a technocratic dystopia or something. I could put it on the list as the new Jim Crow and guitars. Yeah.
I usually don't. I mean, those three books, and yeah, I've read the New Jim Crow and the Jakarta Method. The New Jim Crow was one of the books that I read very early on in my process of like educating myself. I really need to read that one again. Jakarta Method is just excellent. I mean, I absolutely love that book. Vincent Blevins, I believe, is the author of that one. Shock Doctrine, I still got to read, but I mean, in terms of Bevins, so maybe I threw an L in there when it wasn't necessary. For me, in terms of like U.S. imperialism, like there's really no standard higher than Killing Hope by William Blum. Just in terms of like, you can get something like the Jakarta Method, which is a very great book about a specific scenario. But if you want like a list of just all of like a full scope understanding of all the things that have been done pretty much throughout the entire Cold War, Killing Hope is just unrivaled in its thoroughness.
I feel like it's kind of like a Berenstein Bear situation with the L and Bevins. I don't know why, but I also, for whatever reason, always think he has an L in his last name.
Maybe you heard me say it. Nice. And actually, they quote Perenni in the beginning of it. So I remember when I bought that book, right in the beginning, when you open it and it's a Perenni quote, right in the beginning, when you open a book and it's a Perenni quote, you're like, yes, here we go.
Yes. If there's like a Perenni quote where like they're giving a shout out to like Fanon or something, but like real subtle, like it's like, all right, cool.
We're in business. We're in business. And you know, a lot of these economic books, which I really enjoy, don't give quite as much of a favorable head nod towards previous or existing socialist projects as much as Hickel does in this book. Like other books that I recommend alongside with this is 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism by Ha-Joon Chang, who has on the cover of my copy has a quote. He's also quoted in the book, but he's someone that actually has if you're saying that Naomi Klein also has this, but he has a reformed capitalist. He's not actually a socialist. He's more of a reformed capitalist economist. The other book, Talking to My Daughter About the Economy by Yanis Varoufakis. Yanis in many ways describes himself as a socialist, influenced by Marx. Probably some people would disagree with some of his conclusions. I think he's great. I think a lot of his talks and his books are very good, especially if you're like coming in from a very uneducated understanding of the economy. So, but yeah, I think The Divide is absolutely the best out of the three.
I mean, because like we've seen over the last month that we've been reading this, it's impossible not like if you're trying to just like get just the information out of this, right? You'll be highlighting the entire goddamn book.
It's so big. It's so like each paragraph is so rich with no filler. Hey, what's up,
horse?
Each paragraph is so rich that it's an extremely laborious and difficult activity to actually pick out the nuggets that you want to use to illustrate the chapter, because every paragraph is just so thick with relevant information. And being a book that's only about less than 300 pages, the amount that you can learn is just, and it's actually Killing Hope. Killing Hope by William Blum. I almost said William Blevins, which not only is not his name, but it's actually also
right?
not the correct what?
BLUM, right?
BLUM. Yes. BLUM.
N?
Yeah. M as in Mary. As in Mancy.
William Blunt?
Yeah. William Blum, M as in Mancy.
Whatever. I threw it up in chat. Hopefully I spelled it right. If it doesn't, Google will correct me. But yeah, like Pat brings up that book like literally every episode. And if you're listening to the most recent season of Blowback, they mentioned William Blum in literally every episode, at least once.
They also thank you, Dorian. Also, they consistently mention Bruce Cummings, who is one of my favorite authors regarding Korea. I would love to get some of his books on here when we read one day. Me and Johnny are absolutely inundated. We are buried upon a immovable fortress of books that we would like to read on this stream.
It's becoming an art installation. It's not even like it's I don't know how to keep up with this because like I couldn't help myself, and like these were so cheap, and I got all of these. They're so good.
Any respectable book reader cannot help but purchase more books than you could read physically, in the given time. The inflow of books is just far greater than the actual consumption of the book content because it's just so tempting to continue to buy.
There you go. That's my thoughts on it. As a former member of the IMT. So anyways, back to the old strategies by which powerful actors seek to secure their interests in the global economy.
Do you remember last stream? Do you remember the last stream where I made that comment about corruption?
Yeah, I think. No.
So it's so coincidental, or maybe not. Maybe it was like something that was like subconsciously living in my mind from when I read this book a few years ago. But I went off on this corruption thing where I was like, people like to pretend, or it's commonly posited by economist critics of the third world, that the reason that they are defunct and unable to economically prosper is because of internal corruption. They still need guidance from the enlightened West of how to operate their economic institutions. And I went off on that because, and my position on that at that time was that they throw around this word corruption when they dispose of the probably least corrupt individuals that are emerging as popular candidates around the country, and they impose some of the most crooked and corrupt people to ever walk the continent of Africa, such as Mobutu. And that was my take on it. But now, after reading this chapter, I've realized that there is a very different idea of corruption that I should have been accusing the West of in their constant enunciation of global South countries being corrupt. And that is the corruption of Western multinational corporations as they exist, and that the corruption that is exerted on these countries by Western multinational corporations outweighs whatever kind of petty corruption that you may find in the ranks of the domestic politics or business class by orders of magnitude. So that is what I want to get into here. This nature of corruption as it exists, not just of this like petty bribery and embezzlement and lining the pockets of maybe a couple political individuals or something like that, but the way in which corporations operate with tax havens, with misinvoicing and things like this, that they actually extract billions, if not trillions of dollars out of global South countries and into the coffers of either Western countries or nondescript tax havens. So that's what we're going to be breaking down for a little bit here. Johnny, did you have anything that you wanted to put on for this?
Oh, I sent you the link for the Transparency International website.
I already have that up right here. Hold on.
Okay, all right, then yeah, like that's all I wanted to throw up there, in a minute.
Sorry, I was looking at the Congo. This is Transparency International. What this essentially is, excuse me. What this essentially is a corruption watchdog organization that you can go and like you can pull up countries and I have a lot of information on this. This is you don't get me started on the philosophical and scientific precedent of Nazism as it existed long before the Nazis ever existed, long before Adolf Hitler made any kind of a rush for political power, dating back into the back into the 19th century. The same types of policies that Germany exerted upon the Herero and the Nama tribes of what is present-day Namibia, the same racial sciences that promoted manifest destiny in the United States, that motivated Hitler to achieve his own type of colonial empire, to achieve the Lebensraum, which is not a term that was coined by the Nazis, which was a term that was coined by German race scientists that existed for decades prior to the advent of Nazism. So wait, I have a lot on that one. And that's another project that I have that is just faltering in a file on my computer somewhere where I've written a lot on it and read a few books on it. But so please just give us time. I promise. There's a great book called The Kaiser's Holocaust if you want to read more about that. So
wait, they didn't take it from like Manifest Destiny and like all that other shit about like, you know, expanding westward into the Americas and shit?
Yeah, they did. That's what I just said.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Sorry.
Sorry.
So you're going to tell me that Saudi Arabia, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that is literally ruled by a royal fucking family, right, an oligarchy, is less corrupt than secular Syria?
Saudi Arabia is up there.
Come on. Come on.
So, in this chapter, he uses this website here, Transparency International, which is like a Western organization that ranks country by their corruption perception index. They rank them by a score, and they rank them in the world out of 180 countries. So this is kind of like used as like a like on-hand app that you can use to just kind of judge corruption in a country. And Jason Hickel has some disagreements with the way that this operates, as it hoists Western countries. I think America's like number 7 on here. I didn't look at each specific one. I'm sure number 1 is like Holland.
We're actually
Singapore. It might be Singapore at this point, to be honest. But it heralds and exalts these Western nations as beacons of anti-corruption, and it decries Burkina Faso and Democratic Republic of the Congo as being corrupted hellscapes that are not fit for doing business. So this dynamic is refuted by Jason Hickel in a number of ways. So let's get into kind of like the statistics that disprove the Transparency International view of corruption. Let's leave aside the structural dividers of global poverty and inequality and look at the question of corruption on its own terms. There is certainly no denying that corruption is a problem. According to the World Bank, corruption in the forms of bribery and theft by government officials, the main target of the UN Convention, cost developing countries between 20 billion and 40 billion each year. That's a lot of money. And this figure is certainly large enough to warrant our attention as an obstacle of development. But if we broaden our view a little bit and put this figure into perspective, a very different story emerges. As it turns out, this kind of corruption is an extremely small proportion, only about 3% of the total illicit outflows that leak out of the developing world each year. By contrast, the Washington-based Global Financial Integrity calculates that up to 65% of total illicit outflows have to do with corruption of a very different sort: commercial tax evasion. And when we look at commercial tax evasion, the neat corruption narrative that Transparency International tells begins to fall apart. So what this paragraph is essentially saying is that per the UN, developing countries are hemorrhaging somewhere between $20 billion and $40 billion each year.
That's a lot of money.
This is kind of, there's a misconception about this, at least within this conference, that the majority of this money is through those more petty means of corruption that I was discussing before, such as bribery, such as government embezzlement, so on and so forth. Well, Jason Hickel is stating that the data shows a very different picture, and that those more petty forms of corruption only amount to about 3%, whereas 65% of that total illicit outflow is commercial tax evasion. So this is not some like crooked maldevelopment of the people of the Congo, that they're just grifters and shysters and they steal and they line their pockets because they're just not developed or civilized enough to allow business to flourish in their nation. That accounts for about 3% of this money that is not ending up into their domestic GDP. Reality of this is that 65% of this outflow is because of commercial tax evasion by the businesses that are investing in these nations. So I have some things here.
Oh, by the way, we are not number one. We are not even close. We're not even in like the top 10.
I thought we were number 7.
Wait, am I looking at the right thing? The corruption percentage index?
I could have been wrong.
Nah, bro, we're number 27.
Oh, okay.
Somehow Canada is less corrupt than us.
Illicit financial flows from Africa, hidden resources for development. Africa lost $854 billion in illicit financial outflows from 1970 through 2008, according to a 2010 report from the Global Financial Integrity. Illicit outflows from Africa, hidden resource development debuted new estimates for volumes and patterns of illicit financial outflows from Africa, building upon GFI's groundbreaking 2008 report, which estimated that developing countries were losing as much as $1 trillion every year in illicit outflows. This 2010 Africa illicit flows reported featured prominently the 3rd annual conference of African finance ministers in Malawi. The amount of money that has been drained of Africa, hundreds of billions, decades after decade, is far in excess of the official development assistance going in African countries. Staunching this devastating outflow of much needed capital is essential to achieving economic development and poverty alleviation goals in these countries. That's from the website, but the specific report is here, and it's very long, so we're not going to go over the whole thing, but just over its basic. This is illicit financial flows from Africa, hidden resource for development, from the Global Financial Integrity Institution. In December 2008, Global Financial Integrity released its groundbreaking analysis of illicit financial flows from developing countries, 2002 to 2006. We estimated flows of $859 billion to $106 trillion a year. We are pleased to release now illicit financial flows from Africa, hidden resource for development. This study examines the 39-year period from 1970 through 2008. Utilizing accepted economic models, namely the World Bank residual method and the IMF direction of trade statistics, we estimate that such flows have totaled $854 billion across the period examined. This estimate is regarded as conservative, since it addresses only one form of trade mispricing, does not include the mispricing of services, and does not encompass the proceeds of smuggling. Adjusting the $854 billion estimate to take into account some of the components of illicit flows not covered, it is not unreasonable to estimate total illicit outflows from the continent across 39 years at some $1.8 trillion. Much attention has been focused on corruption in recent years, that is, the proceeds of bribery and theft by government officials. In the cross-border flow of illicit money, we find that funds generated by these means about 3% of the global total. Criminal proceeds generated through drug trafficking, racketeering, counterfeiting, and more are about 30 to 35%. The proceeds of commercial tax evasion, mainly through trade mispricing, are by far the largest component at some 60 to 65% of the global total. While we have not yet attempted in this study to verify these approximate percentages for Africa, we believe that they are likely to be of roughly the same order of magnitude. This massive flow of illicit money out of Africa is facilitated by a global shadow financial system comprising tax havens, secrecy jurisdictions, disguised corporations, anonymous trust accounts, fake foundations, trade mispricing, and money laundering techniques. The impact of this structure and the funds it shifts out of Africa is staggering. It drains hard currency reserves, heightens inflation, reduces tax collection, cancels investments, and undermines free trade. It has the greatest impact on those at the bottom of the income scales in their countries. Removing resources that could otherwise be used for poverty alleviation and economic growth. Addressing this problem requires concerted effort, blah, blah, blah. This is just them saying what they want to do. But, so, this is,
he's talking about Joachim Pieper of the first SS heavy tank Adolf Hitler at 70 living in, I don't know. There's a lot going on there. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to totally derail you there, Pat.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. So, I did want to just bring up here that, again, we're not, there's definitely like a big like meme out there that like leftists and socialists for sure are like economically defunct or like, just completely misguided and have no understanding of economics. It's a very common thing to like, oh, economics 101. You see this in memes and things like that.
No, actually, economics 101 is literally just made up bullshit. It's all just, it's all just.
So, but I just wanted to kind of put out that like we're like drawing our inferences here from legitimate financial institutions that are just drawing their information from World Bank and IMF statistics. So we're not like pulling this out of some old dusty file from marxistlibrary.org or something like that.
Yeah.
We are using very highly accredited and public information to understand that tax evasion is responsible for more than two thirds of corruption, illicit outflows from third world developing nations.
Yeah, it's not like we're quoting, fucking like Liberation News, .org or anything like that. Like, this is from the horse's mouth that like trillions of dollars. What is this? Like between 2004 and 2013, developing countries lost a total of $7.8 trillion with a T dollars to illicit outflows.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's all just like, oh, they just have bad leadership and like corruption and stuff like that. Not that like, there isn't a system, right, that's propped up here that like it's going out of the global south. There's no way it's in like 5 hands of like 5 just like secretive billionaires in the global south.
Yeah, no, exactly. So just to go a little bit more onto that, according to the GFI, if you hear me saying GFI and you've been paying attention, that's the organization who conducted the report that I just showed. So we're going to get a little bit more into I'll link that in here too, because I think it's just so good. Like if anybody wants to keep this on hand or like reference it for any reason or fact check us or anything like that, there's a copy to the 44-page report. It's got tables, it's got statistics. There might be a graph in there. I don't remember. I looked through it a little bit earlier today, but definitely check that out. Good to have on hand if you want to kind of understand the economic dynamics that are plaguing the third world. So according to the GFI, each year up to 1.1 trillion flows illegally out of developing countries and into foreign banks and tax havens. This is an almost unimaginable sum. More than the total amount of foreign direct investment that developing countries receive each year, which was $858 billion in 2013, and 11 times higher than the amount of official aid that they received, which was $99.3 billion in 2013. These outflows have been increasing at a rapid pace over the past decade, growing at about 6.5% each year. Between 2004 and 2013, developing countries lost a total of 7.8 trillion in illicit outflows. So that's an important thing to the aid, like the concept of foreign aid or international aid that the United States or other places put out, it's a very rosy conception of egalitarianism and charity. They never show the other side of it. They only show that we give X amount of billions to X said country in aid, but it never says, but also we are extracting 11 times that in taxes that we're evading, or otherwise, unequal exchange rates that we're gaining so much profit off of our interactions there.
Yeah, I was trying to see if there's like an updated what the hell is it, like, number, right? And how much, like, like illicit outflows leave, like, the global south 2022, and it's just telling me that like 84 billion, UNECA estimates that more than 84 billion is lost in illicit financial flows from Africa each year.
Right. But I mean, the kind of common narrative is that it's like, and like I said, in the past, maybe 2 streams or so, is that like, this is the contemporary white man's burden type of ideology, where it's like these countries can't get ahead financially because like, and this is what I was saying about that, like white internationalism. There is like a common thing where when people look at Latin America and Africa and Asia, they almost have this paternalistic view of these people that they aren't able to assemble business or enterprise in a functional way because you're gonna go, you think that in Cameroon that you can just invest there and like those people will steal the money and those people just line their pockets and everyone's so corrupt and they're all criminals. It's like criminalizing. It's like it's like locking your doors when you drive down when a black person walks by your car. It's like the equivalent of that to a whole nation where what I mean. It's like,
meanwhile, like the last episode we did, there was what is it, the Global Times or whatever the fuck it is, like the doing business portfolio or some shit that's like literally just a website managed by like 2 neoliberal economists that are like rate your country based on like how easy it is to do business there and like what kind of like monies you need to sink in order to start a business, how much people you need to start a business there. And like I'm willing to bet money that like if we just put this corruption perceptions index and that like doing business thing, it's like a perfect overlap of like
because
which
they're only looking at
the best to do business with.
Exactly. So in 2013, hot money accounted for 19.4% of total illicit outflows from developing countries, or 211 billion. In 2013, trade misinvoicing accounted for 80.6% of illicit outflows from developing countries. Today, at least 60% of the world trade takes place within multinational corporations rather than between them. So this is kind of like just an example of this consolidation and the monopolizing effect that globalized capitalist commerce has effectively put it in here. That today, 60% of world trade takes place within internally between multinational corporations.
Sorry, I was just trying to find my place in my notes. So yeah, trade misinvoice, or did we get to the trade misinvoicing?
If you have a note on that, that would be great.
Yeah, trade misinvoicing, for its part, involves sending money into secret offshore accounts by cheating the trade system. And he says, for example, imagine that a South African firm has agreed to buy $1 million of steel from a British firm. The South African firm requests the British firm send the invoice for $1 million to a tax haven. The tax haven then re-invoices the South African firm at more than the agreed value of the goods, say $1.5 million. The South African firm pays the $1.5 million to the tax haven. The tax haven then pays the $1 million to the British firm and diverts the rest to an offshore account. As far as the tax authorities in South Africa can tell, the transaction appears legitimate, but the South African firm has successfully spirited, like the Studio Ghibli film, $500,000 into an offshore account where it will never be taxed. Where this practice amounts to a serious crime, tax havens, nonetheless, openly advertise their re-invoicing service and offer to assist firms in setting up shell companies to launder money To launder money and evade taxes. A quick Google search for re-invoicing services turns up dozens of companies located in the Seychelles, Mauritius, and so on, ready and willing to help traders execute their crimes. In 2013, trade misinvoicing accounted for 80.6% of illicit outflows from developing countries, or $879 billion with a B. So I had to read that fucking paragraph 2 or 3 times, right? Because I was just there's a lot of invoicing and tax haven and the same money number being said. I don't know. I'm bad at math and I'm bad at finances. So I'd either make a great economic thief or a really bad one.
One of the two. So the biggest loser in this game is Africa. Already the world's poorest region, sub-Saharan Africa suffers total illicit outflows that amount to 6.1% of its GDP. In fact, Africa loses so much through illicit flows that it is effectively a net creditor to the rest of the world. I thought this point was incredible. If we tally up all types of legal and illegal financial flows, including investment, remittances, debt forgiveness, and natural resources exports, we see that Africa sends more money to the rest of the world than it receives. So it's almost
definitely related.
Exactly. Yeah, this type of situation. So it's almost like the Marshall Plan. You know what I mean? The social democracies that you see, flourishing with their social programs and their nice streets and nice housing and all the things that they're able to do. This is the reason, because there's essentially an enforced Marshall Plan on the continent of Africa. If you don't know what the Marshall Plan is after World War II, when much of Western Europe was devastated by its war with Nazi Germany. The United States injected funds into all of these nations to help them rebuild. So I'm kind of claiming that rebuilding process and the responsibility for probably to some percent of Europe's social democratic successes can be linked to these types of unequal exchange policies with continents such as Africa.
So what you're saying is the guy from the Not Just Bikes channel needs to cop to the fact that all that walkable infrastructure and all those fucking bike lanes are paid for by Africa and the colonization of the global south.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just the ongoing. People act like that stopped with slavery or something like that. That Africa had a unrivaled effect on the development of economies and industries and social programs. Still going on to this day.
If anything, it's gotten worse to this day.
The provocative graph on the following page illustrates the sheer scale of capital that is dripping out of Africa's open veins. I'll pull that up real quick.
You would think it would have been worse prior to 1980 or prior to today, but it really seems 1998 and 1981 and 1998 are the only 2 years where it's just
you take Reagan, you know what I mean? Reagan was kind of a revolutionary figure in global neoliberalism. Even before that, there was at least more of a lip service to protectionist policies and some kind of a paternalistic view of helping nations.
I mean, but just look at the graph. I mean, I gotta assume it's gotta be because of net resources. This has gotta be what is it for the AIDS crisis, I guess? Where they were sent aid 1981 and 82. No, Reagan never did anything about AIDS. So I'm trying to think what in 1981 and 82 and 1998 would have been just that small tiny little jump up instead of that drastic down drain.
I don't know. When did Thomas Sankara come into power? Wasn't it 1980?
86?
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Obviously, the 4 years of Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso probably wouldn't budge that line too much, but that was just a little jokey joke I was making. So just to further contextualize this graph here, in total, developing countries have lost as much as $2 trillion in 2013 through hot money and trade mispricing, or a mind-boggling $14.3 trillion over the past decade. And in case these numbers aren't staggering enough, keep in mind that misinvoicing figures only reflect trade in goods, not trade in services. GFI is not able to capture misinvoicing for services. We have no idea what the scale of illicit outflows may look like in the service sector, but since trade in services counts for 25% of global trade, we can probably bump the figures up by the same proportion. So now this brings us to the next section here, which is on tax havens, which is almost equally as troubling as the previous topics that we were just going over. Still, none of this theft would be possible without tax havens. Altogether, there are around 50 to 60 tax havens in the world. They function as tax havens not only because they offer low or zero tax rates, but because they have very little financial regulation, and most importantly, they shroud financial information behind a veil of secrecy. Indeed, the technical term for a tax haven is secrecy jurisdiction. In most cases, banks and corporations operating out of secrecy jurisdictions are not required to disclose anything about where the money comes from and where it goes. And in some cases, it is actually illegal to disclose such information. Given this, secrecy jurisdictions afford robust protections, not just for tax evaders, but for all kinds of criminals, including money launderers, arms smugglers, and even terrorists. It is impossible to know how much money is stashed in the world's tax havens, but a lowball estimate in 2010 suggested the figure was at least 21 trillion, and probably closer to 32 trillion, about 9 trillion of which is from poor countries. The money stashed away in tax havens amounts to more than 1/6 of all the world's private wealth. Today, at least 30% of all foreign direct investment flows through tax havens, and about 50% of all trade. So there is a study that's called Death and Taxes, actually. I was not able to get my hands on the actual report, but I did find a couple of reviews of it that I just wanted to reach out for here. So this is it. Death and Taxes, the true toll of tax dodging. Christian Aid has conducted that's the name of the organization that actually compiled the original study. It has concluded that the necessary money and more is already available to address poverty. If only those who owe it would pay up. We are talking about tax. This report seeks to expose the scandal of global taxation system that allows the world's richest to duck their responsibilities while condemning the poorest to stunted development, even premature death. We predict that illegal trade-related tax evasion alone will be responsible for some 5.6 million deaths of young children in developing countries between 2000 and 2015. That is almost 1,000 a day. Okay, then all the contributors. So, the mission statement of the IMF and the World Bank is just that they want to alleviate poverty, but we can see right here that the money that is required to address poverty exists, but it is being obfuscated through tax evasion, which is causing millions of children to die every single year because of the funds that are being embezzled from these nations. So
the money exists, the food exists, the labor already exists. There's no excuse for any of this shit other than just capitalism is suffering.
Well, if you look at the total of private wealth in the world, 1/6 of it is just being squirreled away. And I mean, I don't think it's even a misguided economic viewpoint, because I'm not someone that's an economist. I have not been through any formal schooling for economy, but from what I understand is that an economy works well when everything's flowing. You want the money to continually move around. You want to get money to the lowest portions of the society so that they can buy things, they can buy consumer products. Then it's going to go up. They're all employed. They're all making money. So that means that they can spend more money. This was the strategy that brought us out of the Great Depression. This is like a Keynesian viewpoint.
Right.
So how can it be healthy for a global economy if 1/6 of all the money is just being held in tax havens.
Doesn't sound very free. Sounds rather
Restricted and confined.
restricted.
Stagnating.
Sounds all authoritarian.
That's kind of what the term stagnation refers to. A pond that has no movement stagnates. Capital, which is just caught in one place, we call stagnation. Also, it's necessary to have a flow.
And if you drink from a stagnant pond, you get dysentery and you shit yourself to death.
Okay, so here's just one more little summary of this report. Tax Justice Network, Death and Taxes, the true toll of tax dodging. In this report, looking at transfer pricing issues, Christian Aid emphasizes several key points. An estimated 50% of all world trade is going to take place through tax havens. An estimated 60% of all world trade is thought to take place within multinational enterprises, that is, with related parties. I brought this statistic up earlier. The loss of corporate tax revenue for developing countries as a result of transfer mispricing and false invoicing is about $160 billion annually. The role of tax havens and bank secrecy and confidentiality in facilitating transfer mispricing and the resulting loss of tax revenue in developing countries. The role of the 4 major auditing and accounting firms in facilitating trade mispricing and the role of other facilitators. This report examines the different methods, licit and illicit. I've never really even heard the word illicit before, but through which multinational...
No. Stop. You have heard the word illicit. Oh, licit.
No, licit.
Licit. What the fuck? I didn't even know there was another version of illicit.
An unprefixed illicit. It's like something being vincible. Like, something could be invincible, but what about the vincible?
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, repeat it. Wait.
Invincible?
Right.
In is like a prefix. You ever hear about
something can be vincible?
Maybe I think so. Yeah. If something can be listed,
mayhaps.
Mayhap. Okay. This report examines the different methods, licit and illicit, through which multinational corporations and other businesses avoid tax in order to pay as little tax as possible. Lost tax revenue affects all countries, rich and poor, but the impact on the developing world is demonstrably much greater. The report contains several case studies: Zambia, Tanzania, Malawi, India, Peru, and Bolivia. It also describes the socio-economic impacts of such lost government tax revenue in developing countries and emphasizes that if annual tax revenue lost $160 billion as a result of trade mispricing were available, according to current spending patterns in developing countries, the amount of tax revenue spent on health services could save the lives of 350,000 children under the age of 5 every year. The technical appendix describes how Christian Aid calculates the result. I tried clicking on this, it just didn't work.
Which denomination are they?
Oops, something went wrong. You could pay
I'm
for
finding
it.
that with a lot of these websites that we try and use that he quotes in the book, when you try and go on the webpage, it's like, oh, our servers are down.
But specifically in this chapter, both WikiLeaks and this, I tried pulling this up from 3 different ways and I couldn't get to it. But
well, I mean, even that
quoted by a multitude of other organizations.
That corruption page that pulled up earlier, when I first tried to get on the webpage, it wouldn't let me. I had to go through Google Images to find the chart. Then I clicked that and then I was able to get on the site. It's fucking weird.
One last thing on this point.
Oh, the list of countries that he mentions that are havens are wild.
Yeah, we'll get to that point for sure. Where the hell? Oh, there it is. This is a book that would probably be pretty cool to read. It's called Treasure Island. It's quoted a bunch in here. Treasure Islands, Tax Havens, and the Men Who Stole the World. It's a nonfiction book about the secretive role of offshore banks, tax havens, and global economic affairs. The book was written by Nicholas Shaxson, a political analyst and associate fellow of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. It was published on 6 January 2011. Author estimates in the book that around 12 trillion, a quarter of the world's wealth, goes untaxed to tax havens. If banks and companies were included, the amount would be at least twice that. Every FTSE 100 company has subsidiaries or partners in tax havens to avoid tax. Saxon believes that the United States and the United Kingdom are the biggest tax havens in the world, claiming that the U.S., Delaware, Wyoming, Florida, and Nevada is responsible for approximately 21% of offshore business, while the UK is responsible for about 20%. Further, 10% derives from trade carried out through Britain's dependent territories. Switzerland is responsible for about 6% of the offshore trade. London is described as the center of a spider web that links to the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, and the Caribbean, serving the needs of global capital. Interesting book, interesting resource, probably cool to check out. Wish I had, we do these, we're reading a book and then reporting on the book, so it's in no way practical to read a completely other book just to substantiate this chapter of this book that we're reading. So the best I can do is just give you a Wikipedia review. I wish I could have said that I read the whole book, but definitely seems cool. Maybe one day. So that's taxing.
Illicit drugs.
Illicit drugs.
What drugs would you consider illicit?
I'm trying to do some illicit drugs.
Illicit drugs. I don't want them illicit drugs. All right, I'm trying to keep this like legal, kosher.
Do you have the note for that? There are 3 main categories of tax havens.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up
I just have to. Oh yeah, I just have to pee real quick. So can you just read that off?
Yeah. No.
Look, Invincible.
What?
Look in the chat.
Invincible. What the fuck? An opponent or obstacle able to be overcome or conquered, like Ben Shapiro.
Not invincible, like Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah. Mark Wahlberg could probably like whoop my ass, but like Ben Shapiro, like other than my brother, like is like the only person I think I've ever been in like a physical fight with. I think I could take Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, sure. I'll be right back.
I like the confidence in that answer, Pat. So yeah, what's going on, chat? What's the weather like where you're at? Is it rainy and shitty and cold? Are you feeling the winter depression setting in? So something that is not invincible is vincible? I don't know, man. Like, you know what? That's like a perfect topic to talk about real quick while Pat goes to the bathroom. It's like, you always got these dudes that like live in like a town like Pueblo or something, or like, Sucasana or some other shit. And they're like, we speak English here. And it's like, not only do you not like live in a place where like English is the predominant language, but you're upset that like people don't want to like learn this like obtuse, incredibly like just bullshit language with things like invincible, invincible, or licit and illicit. Like, why the fuck would you want to learn this shit? It is a bullshit language. It's bullshit language developed by like Norwegians or whatever that like didn't want to learn Old English, so they spoke this like mishmash that like developed into modern English or some fucking bullshit. Mid-80s, bro. Where the fuck are you? You in Florida or some shit? There's no way it's in the 80s in Florida right now, right? Mid-80s. It's bad. It's like December is upon us. Oh fuck. Yeah, you're in like the Gulf or whatever. No, that would be like the other side. Whatever. You know what I meant. You can tell I'm great with geography.
Hello.
That actually sounds nice. I'm that rare type who prefers humidity, and 80s is maybe a little warm, but not awful. No,
I used to live close to Palm Beach. I lived in Port St. Lucie.
That's where we met.
We met in Port St. Lucie, but then I lived there for like 7 years.
Yeah. What was it like not having seasons? Did it drive you insane?
Moving there from Philadelphia, it was nice at first. it was nice at first, like after you've like experienced just like cold Philadelphia winters for 23 years, but then after like 7 years, like it kind of just like like Christmas is never the same. Like
No.
if you get into any like at all like holiday spirit of like, you know, any kind of like, you know, the camaraderie with your family or friends or anything like that, it just does not feel the same in Florida. And I've kind of like embraced it since moving back to Philadelphia. It just feels so much nicer. Like even though it's kind of cold right now, I kind of like it better this way. What is it? Longing is the sweetest sorrow, or something like that. You know, after being away from it for so long, I missed it.
Distance makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm losing myself, but that's where I'm at.
You're in Port St. Lucie?
Get the fuck out.
What the fuck?
Well, you're either like a former Scientologist, or you moved down there for the same reasons that we were down there. In which case, you know, just for brother.
You move your fucking your glasses down like a librarian. I only know one reason that guys from New Jersey end up in Port St. Lucie.
Yeah, exactly. For those in the know, what's up? What's good? Just for today, bro.
New Jersey guys are in Port St. I actually left Port St. Lucie in 2020. And then I lived in Gainesville for like a year, and then I came back to where I'm from in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah, it's crazy. You came back like literally right before COVID hit, I think, right?
No, COVID was already well underway when I was in
Right.
Florida. I came up like in the like it was already like halfway through the pandemic when I moved up here.
I guess whoever, you know, lived where you're at now, you know, wanted to move out to the suburbs, since like, do you remember that when like housing was suddenly just like?
Well, my landlord here owns a house in the suburbs, so he moved to the suburbs and rented out the house.
Of course, naturally.
But we're getting all crazy.
Yeah, we're getting all crazy here.
While we're on the tangent, I guess this is important to bring up, is that we've been discussing that maybe after the turn of the year, adding a third day to our streaming. We obviously are doing Wednesday nights and Sunday nights now, and those are going to be days that are reserved for this kind of like reading the book, reporting on the book, going over like substantial, topics, bringing up articles, bringing up statistics, showing videos that illustrate points of the book, so that maybe you guys can read the book along with us, or just learn like, our reviews from the book and important points of the book, if that is, at all educational or interesting to you. But then we're thinking about adding a third day that's just way less structured, like maybe Fridays or something like that, where we're just going to talk like this. We're going to bullshit. Maybe we'll go over some like React Andy stuff. Maybe we'll just like go over some like current events, something that doesn't require another day of like intense reading and preparation and links and sources and all that stuff. Because even if we added a third day, I think just each individual day would suffer more because of the increased work. So if we just add another day where it's just more of like a chill stream, maybe react to some Kanye West videos, whatever, just give random half-baked political takes on the state of the world, joke around about stuff, whatever it may be. We're thinking of adding a third subversive comedic relief chill stream day. So
yeah,
that should be
who knows that there might be like, a stream in the future where me and Pat are in the same room. And you'll find out, like,
it looks like we're in the same room right now.
I know, it looks like I could literally just like walk out this door and just be on your camera.
or like if I just go like this and it like enters into your screen.
Wait, no, it's not doing it right. It would have to come from this angle that I can't. No.
All right, so just to kind of, I want to make sure that we get our conclusion out of here before we get too far off.
Yeah. So like,
there are three
about, like,
of tax havens.
Tax
havens in Europe, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Netherlands, which are probably the best known, as well as Belgium, Austria, Monaco, and Liechtenstein.
Liechtenstein, the poor man's fucking Switzerland. Like, literally, I don't know if anybody in here is from Liechtenstein, but like, tell me I'm wrong.
Then there are that tax havens in the United States, such as Manhattan, Florida, and Delaware, as well as U.S.-linked territories like the Virgin Islands, the Marshall Islands, Liberia, and Panama. But by far, the biggest and most powerful network of tax havens is organized around Britain, which was crafted by the once powerful British Empire. There are the 3 British crown dependencies of Jersey, Guernsey, and the Isle of Man. Then there are the 14 British overseas territories, which include Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Gibraltar. Finally, there are a number of territories that Britain no longer formally controls, but which used to be under its imperial power: Hong Kong, Singapore, the Bahamas, Dubai, Ireland, Vanuatu, and Ghana.
So, Pat, do you want to know what's interesting about one of those countries that was mentioned as, a fucking tax haven for Great Old Britain? For the
I was
crown.
going to bring up Singapore, but I have a feeling you're going to talk about Hong Kong.
No, I was going to bring up Singapore. Like,
okay, yeah.
that's rated
Singapore
as
is like the reason why I was so interested in that, and I want you to elaborate why you're bringing up, is because this is like the libertarian circle jerk, place where they're like, look at them, they have free market policies, and look how great they're doing. So that's why I was like kind of scoffed when I read that. But what was your
They have a corruption perceptions index score of 85. They're literally number 4. It's literally a bunch of like Norwegian fucking countries before them. Denmark, Finland, New Zealand, and Norway. New Zealand's not, Nordic, but whatever. You get the fuck.
We don't recognize New Zealand on this stream.
Whatever. Like what continent does it belong to? Is it part of Australia? Is it the Oceania? What is it?
Is Oceania even considered a continent?
I don't fucking know, man. I'm bad at geography. I thought Colorado was like next to Canada, right? Fucking like Singapore, right, is like ranks number 4. They have a score of 85. That makes no fucking sense. You're gonna tell me that like literally Germany is more corrupt than Singapore? You're gonna tell me that fucking Canada is more corrupt than Singapore?
Maybe. I don't have any stats in front of me. I just know
that's why like this index is bullshit. All of this is made up.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we can verify that there's these tax havens that are being essentially used to launder the cartel money of international, tax evaders.
Yeah, and like, don't tell me that, like, I mean, because when you think about it, what the fuck does England actually produce?
Yes, Dorian, the score refers to like number 1 would be the least corrupted, number 180. What was 180? Like, I wish they just had the whole. I wish they just had the whole thing. I wish they just had like the whole. Like, I was looking for like a map that I could just kind of pull.
I sent it to you. Here. This thing right here.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah, the 2021 map is just ridiculous.
So yellow is good, and the darker the red is, the more bad it is.
The more communist, the badderer. And yes, Aotearoa is, what it should be called.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, China's up there pretty high. Japan, very high. Damn,
but that's why I was like, when I was looking at this fucking chart before, I'm like, you're gonna tell me that Saudi Arabia ranks number 52 as like, a fucking Gulf monarchy, right, in terms of the corruption index, but the secular fucking Syria is gonna be 178,
and also Chile is ranked 67.
Like, get the fuck out of here. What are you fucking talking about?
Where's Guatemala? Where's my precious Guatemala?
Precious
150 and 180. What's the lowest, man? It has to be in Africa.
This is honestly like one of the few times
I thought it was going to be. My first 2 guesses were oh, here it is. South Sudan. South Sudan is the worst.
Wow.
Which is funny about that Here's the thing about South Sudan, real quick.
Here's the thing about South Sudan. Fucking, this is like one of the
Land
few
Matrix
charts.
database shows that dozens of land grabs have been conducted for the sake of tourism. A royal company from Abu Dhabi recently acquired 5.5 million acres of South Sudan grasslands, which it plans to convert into an upmarket game preserve peppered with 5-star hotels. So it seems like they're willing to just like push people off of millions of acres of land for investment. You think that, how corrupt could they be?
Also, this is one of the few maps I've seen Suriname like actually listed. And I don't know if you can see right next to, I think that's what, French Guyana or whatever, right next to Suriname. It's France.
It just says France.
It just says France. Fucking
Holy.
what, bro?
That's so funny.
This chart
I
is
don't know
so
why that's
bullshit.
Do they even have yeah, they don't have Puerto Rico on here. I was gonna see. They don't even have Puerto Rico listed as the
They don't
United
even
States.
have Puerto Rico on here? Come on, bro.
Where is Puerto Rico on a map? Am I missing it?
Oh, they got the St. Vincent and the Grenadines on here.
Maybe I'm just not zoomed in enough. I don't know. I can't get too bogged down just going off this map. But
I know. But
problem with
look
tax
how good
havens-
Cuba is rated on here, though.
nice. The problem with tax havens is not only that they facilitate the theft of capital or that they prevent governments from capturing revenues, but also that they induce what analysts call tax competition or tax warfare. Tax havens have set off a kind of global race to the bottom, with countries competing to offer lower tax rates to foreign investors in order to attract them. This constant pressure to reduce taxes makes it very difficult for parliaments and governments to make rational decisions about tax legislation or to plan their budgets into the future. In light of all this, the question of corruption begins to take on a somewhat different hue. Given the role of Britain, the United States, and various European countries in facilitating illicit flows by building and maintaining the global tax haven system, and in the light of the role WTO plays in making it difficult for customs officials to clamp down on mispricing, it seems a bit strange that rich countries appear in corruption-free yellow on the Transparency International map that we're currently looking at.
Yeah. It's kind of sussy, you know?
It's a bit sus. It's a bit sus, isn't it? Man, okay. So the last section I have notes for here is called the land grabbers. We're gonna have to go over that. What?
The land grabbers?
Yeah, the land grabbers. So the land grabbers refers to is in response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Private companies buying up large swaths of land to develop or improve or expand their agricultural capacities, and majority of this land is going to be sourced from the third world. So by 2008, the IMF had announced that world food prices have increased by 80% in a single year. That's in 2008, world food prices shot up by 80%. In a world where more than half the population lives below the poverty line, such an increase in the price of food meant potential starvation for hundreds of millions of people. Beginning in 1990, this is kind of how all this happened. Beginning in 1991, Goldman Sachs took advantage of new financial deregulations and decided to bundle commodity futures, including food, into a single index. Traders could then speculate on this index, and investment funds could link their portfolios to it. It was a new kind of financial derivative, one of many such instruments that were being peddled on Wall Street in those years. For the most part, investors didn't pay it much mind, and the index remained something of a financial backwater for many years. But as the first hints of the subprime mortgage crisis began to appear in 2005, nervous investors pulled out of mortgage derivatives and pumped their money instead into commodities, which are supposed to be stable even when the rest of the economy falters. The result was rampant speculation on commodity futures, which affected prices in the real economy. This had a particularly dramatic impact on food prices, which skyrocketed and hit record highs in 2007. In other words, people who were savvy enough to pull out of the housing bubble before it burst ended up inflating another bubble, this time in food. So essentially what this is saying is that all the speculators that were responsible for the subprime mortgage crisis, which led to the 2009 recession, those that got kind of hip to the game, pulled the money out of that and invested it into commodities such as food and caused another bubble to inflate outside of just the housing crisis one with food commodities as well, which in turn led them to buy up a lot of land for agriculture across the third world.
Well, it almost sounds like capitalism just has like booms and bubbles that burst kind of built into it that eventually crash no matter what.
Somebody should write a book about that or something. So as if the food price crisis wasn't bad enough for the world's poor in and of itself, it had a dramatic knock-on effect that no one saw coming. Investors seized the opportunity to buy up millions of acres of land around the world for agricultural production, for both food and biofuels. So that's another thing, is that agriculture is no longer just pertaining to the production of food. Now biofuel is a huge driver of agriculture in the contemporary world. In order to take advantage of the soaring prices, many governments got in the game as well, worried about future social unrest and anxious to secure stable food supplies in a world threatened by climate change. Countries not self-sufficient in food were particularly eager to snatch up farmland, especially given that a number of big food-producing countries were cutting down on exports in order to ensure they had enough to feed their own needs. So an example of this is in Liberia, 75% of the country's land was in the hands of large investors in 2012, while simultaneously 24% of Liberian children were malnourished. So 75% of all the productive capacity land in Liberia is owned by foreign investors. So yeah. As hunger increased in the wake of the food price crisis, the G8 and more than 200 of the world's biggest agribusiness corporations, including Monsanto, Syngenta, Cargill, and Coca-Cola, took the opportunity to launch a new way of land grabs on putatively humanitarian grounds. In 2012, they launched the New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, which set out to, quote, lift 50 million people out of poverty over the next 10 years through inclusive and sustained agricultural growth. Peasant farmers are notably absent from the alliance.
What do you know?
Promises agricultural aid and private investment to African countries that agree to change their laws in order to facilitate access to land for foreign firms.
How many signed up?
What?
How many signed up for that?
10. Agreed to cut corporate tax fee rates, ease export regulations, extend the length of leases, and set huge chunks of prime agricultural land for agribusiness. In the Ivory Coast, these deals are set to transfer some 1.5 million acres to foreign companies, which according to a 2013 report by the watchdog group Grain, will displace tens of thousands of peasant rice farmers, and destroy the livelihoods of thousands of small traders, the very people that the G8 claims will be the primary beneficiaries of this new alliance.
Kind of seems like every time that something goes wrong, their solution is literally, what kind of like new deal or new kind of like, group effort can we make out of these private companies that will actually just make whatever the problem we're trying to solve worse?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like this neoliberal mentality that anytime that there's an issue, that the only way that it can be solved is by uplifting market mechanism. Market mechanism must be embraced to the fullest degree, even if it's paradoxically being supported by the government. Even if like the subordinated government has to implement regulations or deregulations or in any way that to make markets the hallmark of every economy.
Yes, like bloodletting. When you have a massive injury, you must let the blood continue to flow to heal.
It's like a bad economy it's like George Washington's body. You got bad money in there. You need to get it all out, and then we'll inject some new money. So here's the watchdog group that was cited in the book called GRAIN, which is a small international nonprofit organization that works to support small farmers and social movements in their struggles for community-controlled and biodiversity-based food systems. So here's competitions with cheap imports means that the margins are thin for Ivorian rice farmers and small traders like Yanande. Details of this plan are found in a 2020 agreement between the government of the Ivory Coast, the G8 countries represented by the EU, and a grouping of multinational and national companies involved in the rice trade. Known as the Cooperation Framework, the agreement is part of the new Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, a partnership with G8, a number of African governments, transnational corporations, and domestic companies. These 3 projects alone will displace tens of thousands of peasant rice farmers and destroy the livelihood of thousands of small traders. The very people the G8 claims will be the primary beneficiaries of this new alliance. So obviously there's like a lot. Smells Like Structural Adjustment is a great, that's the lesser examined Nirvana single. Smells Like Structural Adjustment. So yeah, here's this if you want to get a little bit more into this process again of like the euphemistic organizations that are, oh, we're embarking on a campaign to alleviate poverty and create more sustainable agriculture business and blah 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 blah, when in reality they are just facilitating land grab for major multinational corporations and pushing tens of thousands of peasant farmers into poverty and thus selling their labor for dismal wages because they have no other way to sustain themselves. This also has to do with seeds as well. Land is not the only commons that the alliance seeks to enclose. Seeds are on the agenda too. An agreement with Mozambique requires that it systematically cease distribution of free and unimproved seeds. Tanzania has been made to pass a new seed act that protects corporate patents on biological material. Similar reforms have been foisted on the 8 other participating countries. So this is kind of like that Monsanto thing where like are now
they want to be able to patent the seed, and therefore no one else is able to grow it and no one else is allowed to plant it.
So just to kind of conclude here, I just have a couple more things. Food production and biofuel may be the biggest drivers of land grabbing, but there are many other sectors involved as well. In Papua New Guinea, more than a tenth of the country's land was grabbed in a single decade and handed over to foreign logging companies eager to get their saws into the region's famous rainforest. In Cambodia, 5 million acres, or half the country's total agricultural land, has been handed out to private countries, mostly for sugar production. So many Cambodian peasants have been illegally evicted from the land that the new sugar exports have become known as blood sugar. Which is funny because like when I first read that, I Googled blood sugar, and obviously there's,
Did you get the like Portuguese dessert?
Is that a dessert?
Yeah, it's like a pastry or whatever. It's like a Brazilian pastry.
I was saying like blood sugar, like, yo, you got to watch your blood sugar. So, since the start of Everything But Arms Treaty by the European Union, Cambodia has experienced a sugar rush. The treaty allows for all sugar produced in Cambodia to be exempt from tax when entering the EU. The boom attracted powerful investors, and since 2006, at least 75 hectares of land have been set aside in 3 provinces of Cambodia for production of sugarcane. Human rights organizations have reported that more than 12,000 people have been forced off their land to make way for this development. Crops have been raised, animals have been shot, homes have been burned to the ground, thousands of people have been left destitute. Some have been thrown in jail for daring to protest, given no option but to accept inadequate compensation. Villagers gave up their homes and farmlands. The EU is to date yet to investigate these reports. In the meantime, families forced off their land who have lost their only source of income have little choice but to work for the very companies who have claimed their land. Either at the factory level or cutting and bundling sugarcane rates for as low as $2.50 per day, finding the need to request the help of their children to work in the cane fields, still barely earning enough money to survive. In March 2013, a lawsuit was filed in the UK against Tate & Lyle, the multinational sugar giant, to which it has been reported the majority of exports from the Kokang plantation are being sent. 200 Cambodian farmers are suing the company for violating their rights, as under Cambodian law, the fruits of the land belong to the landowner, or lawful possessor in this case. According to humanitarian organizations, Tate & Lyle is knowingly enriching itself off the harvest of stolen land, and the rightful owners to the harvest are not receiving their share of sugar sales. Land ownership in Cambodia is difficult to establish due to the country's evolving legal and political structures following the fall of the Khmer Rouge regime, and the country is slowly trying to reestablish land titling through government programs. So it's so crazy that this is still going on to this very day. It's enclosure, just as what happened when Britain transferred from serfdom or from feudalism to capitalism, where you have to force people off of their land so that they will engage in wage labor. So these are people that just owned land and were able to cultivate land for their own economic prosperity are forced off, having their animals shot, having their houses burned down, and then they have no choice but to sell their labor to the very corporations that they are being evicted from their land to serve. This is the same thing that happened in the liberal revolutions of Guatemala, where indigenous communities who were very much content to just work their own land for the survival of themselves and their family were then forced to work for very low wages on banana plantations and coffee plantations because they were forced off their land that was stolen from them and given no other realistic opportunity. When was this? 2006. Yeah. So,
See, 2013.
2013, yeah. So, across Southeast Asia, around 1 million acres have been converted from peasant holdings to rubber plantations operated by Chinese companies ready to supply the ravenous market for car tires in China. And the Land Matrix database shows that dozens of land grabs have been conducted for the sake of tourism. Oh, and this is what I read earlier. A royal company from Abu Dhabi recently acquired 5.5 million acres of South Sudan's grasslands, which it plans to convert into upmarket game reserve, peppered with 5-star hotels. The last thing I have here is just about this organization called RED, which is the United Nations RED program, which is a program on reducing emissions from deforestation and forest regulation. And for RED, it seems like a good step, but in theory, but in practice, it had devastating consequences. In many cases, RED pilot projects have led to the forced eviction of indigenous communities from forests on the basis that their farming practices contribute to deforestation. In Kenya, for instance, the government has cooperated with a World Bank-led RED scheme by evicting and destroying homes of 15,000 indigenous Sengwer people who live in the Mbobut forest. RED is also incentivizing a new wave of land grabs. Corporations and states are rushing in to buy forests in developing countries in order to cash in on payouts, a practice now known as carbon colonialism. Some are taking advantage of loopholes in RED that actually permit deforestation of original forests so long as the new forests are planted elsewhere, even if those new forests happen to be plantations. In other words, some of the very companies that are driving deforestation through land grabs are now grabbing yet more land under the guise of offsetting the environmental damage that they have caused. Instead of protecting forests from destructive market forces, RED is rapidly bringing forests into the market. And in the end, it will lead to zero reduction of carbon emissions at source. After all, the whole idea behind carbon credits is to allow polluters to avoid reducing their emissions by buying their way around the rules.
So do you want me to go on to the next section?
Hold on. This is conservatism as genocide. RED versus indigenous rights in Kenya. Neo-colonial developmentist forces with green sheen are evicting and murdering people in the guise of conservation and climate change mitigation. So, a lot of information there just to illustrate the situation. Do you want to go on to the next section? Because that's the last of the notes that I have.
There's a lot that RED is doing that like can be compared to basically like any other colonial government and like putting commercial value on forests and neglecting like the spiritual value and like the non-material value that like a lot of this land and these forests hold for the indigenous people and local communities there. But the next chapter, the climate changers, what is this? There was an Ivy League school article that went viral a couple of years ago claiming that Africa was contributing to climate change because their makeshift stoves that weren't eco-friendly. What the fuck? You know what? I actually do have like an anecdotal little story about that. I got into an argument with my friend that was trying to tell me one time that bonfires create like as much CO2 as like a car or something like that. That bonfires are like a contributing cause to climate change, and I really wanted that conversation to end like immediately. But he opens up the topic of climate changers with the typhoon Haiyan that made landfall in Southeast Asia in November 2013, and how even the most calloused, news-hardened observers could not have been left unmoved by the images that circulated around the world that month, depicting destruction on an overwhelming scale. Whole cities and towns were laid to waste, and some, not a single structure was left standing. Have you ever looked at some of the videos of this?
No, I've never seen it. When I was reading it, I didn't even realize that there was such a devastating situation there.
Do you know the band Nazem?
Yeah,
that's what he died in. He was I think on his honeymoon with like his like fiance or something, or wife, I guess, at that time. That's how he died.
wow.
Yeah. Nazem is great grind for everybody in chat.
We stand in false grind in this
Yes.
chat. In this
it was the deadliest typhoon to hit the Philippines in modern history, killing at least 6,300 people and leaving 330,000 injured. As late as 2015. This hit in 2013, so in 2015, some bodies were still being retrieved from the wreckage, and more than 1,000 remained missing. And the body of that like Norwegian dude from that band Nazem, I don't believe his body was ever recovered. Yeah. But the body count is still only the tip of the iceberg. A vast humanitarian disaster unfolded in the wake of the typhoon. More than 6 million people were displaced in the Philippines alone, and 1.9 million people left homeless, triggering an internal refugee crisis. Aid agencies warned of disease epidemics in the region due to a lack of food, water, and medication. And for anybody that that remembers in chat, about like Hurricane Katrina when it hit New Orleans, or any of the other disasters that have like recently hit. I think the most recent one is still Pakistan, right? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
70% of Pakistan is still underwater, right?
Water, yeah. Mm-hmm. That just happened recently. I haven't read too much into it, but I think I heard Vijay Prashad say. For some reason, he was the first one that said it. I didn't see it on any major news publication or anything like that. I think I just heard Vijay Prashad be like, yeah, Pakistan is currently, 70% underwater. And I looked it up, and it's like, oh yeah, massive flooding all throughout Pakistan.
Like literally from space. It's not even like it's like I haven't looked too much into it, but I'm like, should these like start being considered like new lakes or something soon? Like, you can still see the water from space.
It's insanity,
right?
We stand VJ. Yes, we do.
We forever stand VJ. He is canonized. I mean, like, I know that everybody likes to say that, like, oh, you tankies, like, you're so dogmatic and shit like that. Like, no, if there's anybody that's like canonized as like a saint, it's Vijay Prashad.
Vijay and Perenni, those are my main spiritual advisors.
Yes. Like, forget any other theoretician or anything, like that. Vijay and Perenni, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think have done anything wrong. There's no Pakistani flags in people's bios, so curious.
Curious.
Indeed, no billions of dollars being sent to Pakistan like literally every month.
Well, maybe there was when during the Afghanistan war, and we were using like Pakistan as like a. I'd have to reread that book, but Pakistan was like, we were pretty chummy with them, and we used like some of their intelligence agencies or some.
Don't even get me started on the Deobandist school, right? And the roots of like Islamic extremism in reaction to English colonialism, and how like
we started.
the mullahs, right, that trained Al Qaeda, right, were fucking they were paid for by the Saudis, but trained in Pakistan because that's like just south of Afghanistan.
There's a great book called Invisible History about Afghanistan. Super good book. One that I would definitely recommend. I also have a book, Tariq Ali, Afghanistan, the 40-year chronicle. I haven't read it yet, but I'm very, very much would like to.
I've been meaning to read Revolutionary Afghanistan for like.
I read it. I didn't like it that much.
Yeah,
I didn't love it.
What did he shit on the Afghan Maoists?
To be honest, it just wasn't that great of a read.
Gotcha.
It had a lot of good information on it, but like Invisible History was just far more of an engaging read. It was much more enjoyable.
Right. So, as it happens, the UN Climate Change Conference was being held in Poland at exactly the same time as Haiyan struck. Jeb Stano, the gentle, soft-spoken delegate from the Philippines, gave an emotional speech that quickly went viral on social media. I don't know if you want to be able to pull that up for us and see how long it is. I know I probably should have. I'm usually more responsible than this.
Can you just spell his name for me?
Yeah, it is YEBSANO.
Okay.
Super Typhoon Haiyan made landfall in my family's hometown, and the devastation is staggering, he said. I struggle to find words even for the images that we see from the news coverage. I struggle to find words to describe how I feel.
Hold on. We'll just play it. Hold on, I have it right here.
My country is being tested by this hellstorm called Super Typhoon Haiyan. We remain uncertain as to the full extent of the damage and devastation. Information trickles in agonizingly slow manner because power lines and communication lines have been cut off and may take a while before they are restored. The initial assessment showed that Haiyan left a wake of massive destruction that is unprecedented, unthinkable, and horrific. And the devastation is staggering. I struggle to find words even for the images that we see on the news coverage. And I struggle to find words to describe how I feel about the losses. Up to this hour, I agonize, waiting for word to the fate of my very own relatives. What gives me renewed strength and great relief is that my own brother has communicated to us and he had survived the onslaught. I speak for my delegation, but I speak for the countless people who will no longer be able to speak for themselves after perishing from the storm. I speak also for those who have been orphaned by the storm. I speak for those the people now raising it's time to save survivors and alleviate the suffering of the people affected. We can take drastic action now to ensure that we prevent a future where super typhoons become a way of life. Can we ever attain the ultimate objective of the convention, which is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system? By failing to meet the objective of the convention, we may have ratified our own doom. We have to confront the issue of loss and damage. Loss and damage is a reality today across the world. We cannot solve climate change when we seek to spew more emissions. In solidarity with my countrymen who are struggling to find food back home, and with my brother who has not had food for the last 3 days, with all due respect, Mr. President, and I mean no disrespect for your kind hospitality, I will now commence a voluntary fasting for the climate. This means I will voluntarily refrain from eating food during this COP until a meaningful outcome is in sight, until concrete pledges have been made to ensure mobilization of resources for the Green Climate Fund. We cannot afford a fourth COP with an empty GCF. until the promise of the operationalization of a loss and damage mechanism has been fulfilled, until there is assurance on finance for adaptation, until we see real ambition on climate action in accordance with the principles we have so upheld. Mr. President, this process has been called a farce. It has been called an annual carbon-intensive gathering of useless frequent flyers. It has also been called saving tomorrow today. We can fix this. We can stop this madness.
Thank you, Philippine.
I don't know if you saw the article that I posted in there. His superior berated him for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's an Inquirer article. So take it for what you will, but
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's awful. I hate this. So he moves on fairly quickly, about how the West, the global North, is largely responsible for a majority of the emissions, right, that are causing this climate change. There's a number of videos that you can check out, that talk about this. There's the, what's his name, Raleigh or whatever, on Climate Town. There's Our Changing Climate. There's a bunch of different YouTube channels out there if you want to check that stuff out. I like Our Changing Climate the best because he acknowledges that capitalism is not going to solve this issue. But Jason Hickel, says industrial revolution, from the start of the industrial revolution until today, humans have released a total of 588 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Rich industrial economies are responsible for about 70% of this. Although measurements vary slightly, the number is still much higher if you count only industrial emissions, but slightly lower if you include non-industrial emissions, such as from deforestation. Yet, according to the data from the Climate Vulnerability Monitor, developed nations bear only 12% of the total cost of climate change. Developing countries, by contrast, have to bear 82% of the total cost, which in 2010 meant $571 billion in losses due to drought, floods, landslides, storms, and wildfires. The monitor predicts that as these costs continue to increase, the share of losses borne by developing countries will increase as well to 92% by 2030. By then, developing countries will suffer losses amounting to $954 billion per year.
Was there? And I'm sorry if I'm bringing this back or jumping forward, but isn't there a part in there also that says that the this typhoon that hit the past 10 most intense typhoons have all been since 2008 or something like that. There's an extremely this isn't just some kind of there's been typhoons throughout history. These environmental catastrophes are clustering in just the most recent 20 years or so.
Yeah, I mean the jury's been back. All right, it's been back since you're good. It's been back since the fucking 60s or whatever, when all these top oil execs had all these studies that proved that climate change is due to human activity, right? Yeah. And that human activity was predominantly happening in the countries that advanced the fastest.
Industrial countries, yeah.
The industrial countries, right? So he goes on to say in 2005, developing countries as a group caught up with the richer counterparts in terms of CO2 emissions, a change for which China is almost exclusively responsible. And you'll hear this a lot to this day, right? Especially now that, like, you know, the Cold War is ramping up hotter and hotter every goddamn day, every goddamn year against China, given its heavy reliance on coal. Indeed, China recently surpassed the USA to become the world's biggest polluter, and Brazil, Indonesia, and India have now surpassed Germany and the United Kingdom. Much of this has to do with the fact that globalization has shifted production to developing countries, and especially to China, effectively outsourcing responsibility for pollution. Right?
Yeah. Like, oh, look, it's all China. It's not Nike or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's
well, it's kind of like how they always say that, like, you know, China, you know, they took all the jobs to make all the chips and make all the cars and like make all the things. Like,
they came to the United States and they invaded the factories and they took them.
Yeah.
They annexed them.
We're getting to that, Sam. We're getting to that. So, still, once corrected for population size, the picture looks significantly different. The United States remains the biggest polluter. Yeah, number one, USA. So, like, the United States remains the biggest polluter, emitting 3 times more CO2 than China on a per capita basis, Dorian. Germany emits almost double what China does per capita. And India, for its part, emits just a fraction of the world average. Each Indian is responsible for only 1.4 tons of CO2, while the world average is upwards of 4.5 tons per person. Africans emit only 0.9 tons per person, and yet the cost of climate change will hit Africa and India the hardest, amounting to 4% and 5% of their GDP, respectively. And I don't know if any of you guys remember last summer, the heat was so fucking bad in India, right? You had people that, like, you know, normally work outside and shit, just like fucking hiding underneath like overpasses and shit from the sun. I mean, you were there like less than a year ago, right? You tell them.
I was there you said last summer, the most recent summer?
I think it was either last summer or like this past year, right?
I was there in June. I don't know. It was pretty hot. To be honest, after 7 years, it wasn't that bad. I wasn't there in like the dead of summer though, but the dead of summer usually that's like when the rain season is.
All right, it was this year. India, it reported one of the hottest summers in 2022, recording 203 heat wave days, which was the highest in recent past. The maximum number of such episodes this year were reported in Uttarakhand and followed by Rajasthan.
I was in Rajasthan in May.
Yeah. The 2022 heat wave in India and Pakistan was extreme weather event, which resulted in the hottest March in India since 1901. The hot season arrived unusually early in the year and extended into April, affecting a large part of India's northwest and Pakistan. So, like, you know, you were there, like, I guess, right after all that happened.
Yeah.
And apparently it was like temperatures of like 109 to like 113.
Yeah, you know, what are you going to do?
Your average Florida summer.
June, I don't believe is summer like it is here. I think actually now that you're mentioning it, I think actually May is like peak summer in India as far as I know, because I'm pretty sure tourism falls off in March. Like the tourist season is from like late in the year to like March, and then April and May are like, it's almost like no go. Like I read on so many tourist websites, don't go to India in May, don't go to India in May. Like, and I just went anyway. But then also A little bit further than that, like once you get to July is when it's like monsoon season, because I guess all the heat and the humidity and it leads in like the rainy seasons. So most people do not want to go to India in the time that I was there or the preceding few months because of all the rain.
So what the hell is it? He goes on to talk about how why are the consequences of climate change so unevenly? And Pat was like, fuck it, I'm gonna go and man. Yeah, Pat does that.
Well, there was an important thing that I wanted to be present for. And if
happened to happen in May.
yeah, and if my brothers in the my comrades in the CPIM, if it was temperate enough for them to gather in Kannur, then I was going to meet them.
So he goes on to talk about like, why are the consequences of climate change so unevenly distributed, right? Like Dorian pointed out. And as a result, many drought-prone areas of the global south will have even less water than they do now. Developing countries where agriculture is already precarious and generally conducted on a small, non-industrial scale, even slight changes in precipitation can cause devastating damage. Ironically, the high-yield seeds that have been in use since the Green Revolution in the 1960s are much less resistant to a variable climate than the older heirloom varieties. What do you fucking know? According to The Economist, by 2040, Indian crop yields will decline by up to 9%. In Africa, the growing period could be reduced to 20%. By 2080, the agricultural production could fall by as much as 21% across the developing world, all while the demand for food continues to rise. Oxfam, who should have never sold their fucking vaccine to Bill Gates during COVID, predicts that as a result, world hunger will worsen significantly. The number of people at risk of hunger could increase 20% by 2050 as the availability of calories diminishes across the world. But we've learned through previous chapters that it's not diminishing. There is enough going around right now.
Yes.
It's the means of distribution that's fucked.
It's not favor people who don't have it.
Yes. Right?
It's not a scarcity problem, and it's never been a scarcity problem.
It never has been. It has always been a distribution problem, right? In Africa, many cities and towns are built intentionally just above the malaria line, just high enough to escape. Crazy. What's that?
This part crazy, because this is just stuff that you don't think about. Like,
yeah,
go ahead.
Just high enough to escape the reach of malaria-bearing mosquitoes, the number one killer in Africa, followed by hippopotami. As the weather warms, mosquitoes are able to move into altitudes that were previously uninhabitable for them. Present estimates suggest that by 2030, an additional 90 million Africans could be exposed to malaria. Similarly, meningitis outbreaks are expected to increase in Africa as the disease is highly correlated with drought. The recent upsurge in dengue fever and the Zika virus, I don't know if any of you guys remember Zika, the latter of which plagued Brazil during the 2016 Olympic Games, are also associated with the changing climate. Well, what a throwback. Do you remember Zika?
Barely.
Or it's just like if you get it and like you get pregnant, your kid gets born with like weird googly eyes or whatever.
Is that what it is?
Some shit like that.
Is that the diagnosis?
I hardly remember. I am not a medical professional.
So yeah, like this it's so like, you have entire cities that are built like just because it's like you have to be above a certain elevation or away from sea level to be able to like, because mosquitoes, I guess, don't come that high outside of the humidity or the moisture level. Now you have rising water and the mosquitoes are going to rise along with it to these elevations that are sheltering the population of Africa to some degree from Africa's most deadly virus, which is malaria. And now it's like, oh, well, fuck, we can't just pick up and move the whole city. I guess we're just gonna have to deal with poisonous mosquitoes. And the thing that a lot of people don't know about disease pandemics. Oh no, actually that's incorrect. Go ahead. I had it backwards. Go ahead.
No, keep going.
Well, no, I was going to say normally it's the results of famine that people don't understand, that it's not always like just about people that that die as a result of not having calories in their body. It's the diseases that ravage people at a higher rate because of their malnourished state. So now we're looking at kind of like the inverse of that, where it's like you have malaria, but the malaria is just going to be heightened because of people's malnourished state, because of probably a lot of the other factors that we've discussed so far in the reading of this book.
But the fact that they're still going to be coerced right into working these laborious working conditions and hours with like, you know, on like 1,000 calories, you know, that are just like empty, right? You know, because they're getting their food from like the back of a fucking UN truck, you know, and and yeah. So like this whole thing is fucked.
Yeah, it's very this part of it is like very depressing.
And like I'm not gonna lie, like it's hard not to just highlight the entire paragraph, and I might as well be like narrating the book at this point.
Yeah, and that's what it felt like I was doing too. But so much of it, like it's so this chapter is very statistic driven, and if you're not reading it, it's like, and also I'm not an economics expert, so like I kind of have to rely on him a lot, because like we're not operating this stream being like, me and Johnny are experts in economics, and we're going to tell you about how poverty is protected. Yeah. We're reading a book, and we're trying to be somewhat of like a mouthpiece of this book and find the relevant parts and give a review of the book, but also kind of express the themes of the book. So we have to rely on these stats significantly, because we're not the ones really doing the heavy lifting here. We're just mouthpieces.
All right, so I'll skip around to some parts, right? But I really, really highly recommend that everybody read this book. I'm gonna put the
PDF. I did it last time too. Here's a free PDF for the book for anybody that would like to just read it along with us. Read it yourself. I mean, this is a book that I just simply cannot recommend enough. It's an easy read. It's a great read. It's an informative read. Yeah.
So projections of the damage that climate change is likely to cause in the near future are terrifying indeed. But apparently they are not terrifying enough to get the governments of rich countries to take serious action to mitigate their emissions. Scientists tell us that if we want to avoid catastrophic climate change, we can only allow our planet to warm a maximum of 1.5 Celsius above baseline. I don't know what the fuck that means, because I use Fahrenheit because I'm an ignorant pig of an American.
40 rods to the hog's head.
What?
40 rods to the hog's head.
When the world's governments met in Paris for the COP21 summit in 2015, who remembers that shit? They agreed to this 1.5 target. But the text of the agreement indicates that their commitments are little more than a pinky promise, a lip service. The agreement relies entirely on countries' voluntary pledges, known as Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, or INDCs, and unfortunately the sum total of the voluntary pledges that have been made so far fall a good deal short of the target. If all of the pledges are upheld, which is very fucking unlikely, given that they are non-fucking binding, we will still be hurtling towards 2.7 to 3.7 Celsius of warming. So I'm going to skip over some parts about like gigatons of CO2 and like Greece being like on fire. Like what might the world look like by 2100? Not good, dog. Like Italy, Spain, and Greece will turn into deserts. By 2100, sea levels will have risen by 1.24 meters. I don't even know what the fuck that means. What is that in feet? Drowning cities, including Amsterdam and New York. 40%.
What is that in subway? What is that in foot-long hoagies? I don't understand that. I don't even know how to measure that.
What is that in Subway $5 footlong?
What is that? Can you measure that in Subway sandwiches, please?
40% of species would be at risk of extinction, and huge portions of our rainforest would wither away, crop yield would collapse by 35%, and key staples like Indian wheat and U.S. corn plummeting by 60%, leading to widespread famine, particularly in the global south. 4 feet! That's like a lot of feet!
That's like 4
Fuck.
Subway sandwiches.
God damn it. 4 degrees will probably mean the total melting of Greenland ice sheet and possibly the entire West Antarctic ice sheet as well, which would then raise sea levels by another 6 meters and displace hundreds of millions of people around the world. Like, I don't think that people are like realizing, and fuck me for, you know, like still remembering this, but like I remember back when I was still like learning about a lot of shit very early on, you know, into the Bernie 2016 campaign, I became like a fan of you know, Chapo Trap House, right? And I just remember like, I forget who it was they had on talking about this, but like literally what's happening right now is that there is a culture being created around this like fear of the migrant, right? And this like irrational, like, you know, need to defend the country, and you know, this really like linchpin idea around like the wall, right? You know what I'm saying, Pat? That like we are creating a culture because, like, you know, we talked about on our like first episode about like, you know, Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality, that like capitalism isn't just a mode, you know, of economic production and distribution, but it's also, it creates a culture, right? And just as this book has, you know, perfectly you know, tied it in, that like we have these cultural ideas around poverty and hunger and corruption, that like this is innate and this is natural and this is just the state of things, right? And we're not far off from a future where there is a culture that sees these climate refugees that are inevitable as this threat that needs to, you know,
it'll get
be
scapegoated into like a xenophobic rhetoric.
Yeah, that
against
there's
it.
not enough to go around, and that like, you know, these climate refugees are bringing their, you know, barbaric culture, what have you, or, you know, wherever the fucking like culture war takes it, right, and spins it, or however like the libs try to dress it up with like, you know, some nicety that like, you know, isn't quite as bloodthirsty as like the reactionary branding of it, but like we are hurtling towards that climate change like will lead to people fleeing these coastlines, like Sam brought up, right? The videos of Miami after a hurricane are like ocean waves and city streets, like remember how people reacted to Americans, to their own people, right?
Yeah.
Especially they're impoverished, they're fleeing from these broken levees, these flooded out cities that like are never rebuilt, but the land is bought up by, you know, outside, you know, investors, right? And you know, buildings are constructed that they will never be able to afford. Like the French Quarter, apparently, like a majority of the people that used to live there before Katrina, like just can't afford to move back. So like a lot of like the culture and a lot of like, you know, the community that was present there just isn't there anymore. You know what I mean? But it's just like, I'm imagining this future, right, due to climate change, that will just lead to so much death, not just from climate change, but, you know, from just this very reactionary culture. I mean, because like think about it, we have a new shooting every other goddamn week, man, right? If it's not at the schools, it's at like a fucking, you know, Walmart, you know, a night shift manager, like, you know, gunning down his own coworkers because of who gives a shit, right? Or, you know, any other excuse. We're really just accelerating towards like, you know, a truly unstable point. And if you add climate refugees on top of it, if you add the inability for people to get food, not just because like it's unavailable, but because it's so fucking expensive, forget it. But that's just my brief aside. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to touch on about this.
No, like this is like the part of the book where I didn't really have. I read it. I took pretty extensive notes on the other side of it. Climate change, like obviously, like just like the climate change issue requires like probably a whole book or a whole stream or a whole volume of books to really represent adequately. So I think like the statistics that you presented here is good for right now. We've also been streaming for a while. I do have to get off so I can get a couple of school assignments in before midnight. But I didn't have adequate notes on that, so I'm glad that you were able to kind of take the reins there. But yeah, just in conclusion, we only have about 50 pages left of the book. So for Sunday's stream will likely be the conclusion of The Divide, and then we'll talk about what we have coming next in the following week after that.
All right, so everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's we're getting close. The end is clap. The end is nearly here, and if you want to purchase your own copy of what is it, 1776, the Counter Revolution, right? You don't necessarily have to, but like we're going to give you enough time to go out there and get that for yourself if you want to read along, but like we'll gladly hook you up with like a PDF of it. Right, we want you to be able to read along, like we've said a couple times, this isn't just like a Twitch stream where you're reacting and we're reacting to whatever our favorite fucking soft drinks and candy and shit. Like it's like a book club, we want to hear what you think too.
Like a book club or like an interactive podcast where like everybody can kind of like contribute like their own findings to it and things like that. Like there's been a number of times where we'll kind of go off on a tangent stimulated by chat, as long as it's within like the realm of the book that we're talking about. But we definitely want the root of this to be like academically based and not just relaxed reaction kind of stuff that's just kind of like, oh, what did they say, wow, that's crazy, and then like move on to the next trending topic. We want this to be
Tootsie
more
Rolls are their favorite candy. What? Whack.
So yeah, that's we're growing, and we want to want the stream to grow in accordance with what everybody's looking for. So definitely let us know about that additional day. But other than that, I think that's about it for today.
I want to see if this works. Come on, please work. All right. Lal Salam. Stay strong. See you around.
Lal Salam, everybody. Thank you so much.
Oh, wait. Try again. Shit.
What'd you try doing?
I'm trying to do this fucking bullshit.
Are you trying to do a star wipe?
Trying to do.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Dorian. Thanks, Frankster. Thanks, Vlad. Everybody, appreciate you guys.
Y'all are watching me fail hard trying to do a raid. Okay. All right.
He's trying to do a star wipe. Star
All
wipe
right.
us out of here, Johnny. Star wipe us out. Oh, it's a raid. Okay.
All right.
All right. Love you guys.